A chilling effect, known as social proof, influenced nearly every decision we make. It's the instinct to follow the crowd, to assume that something must be right if many people believe or do it. In 1968, a woman named Kitty Genovese was assaulted outside her New York apartment. Despite screaming for help for nearly half an hour, no one intervened or called the police. Hundreds of people saw or heard the assault. Social proof is a powerful tool that advertisers constantly use. They tell you that their product is loved by millions, that it's a bestseller, or that everyone is switching to a new service. Even if you have never looked into it yourself, you instinctively trust it because of the illusion of mass approval. Even a handful of fake reviews can influence someone to buy a product. Scammers use the same tactic that cults, Ponzi schemes, and propaganda machines use. They make people believe that everyone else is doing it, so they'll follow. The real danger of social proof lies not just in marketing, but in how it controls behavior. For example, you might see a cryptocurrency inflated by bots on social media, or an unexpected influx of accounts pushing a false narrative. These tactics create credibility where none exists. Group studies have shown that when more people are around, fewer people are likely to step in to help. This phenomenon is known as the bystander effect, and it occurs when people assume that someone else will take responsibility. In extreme cases, social proof can even fuel mob mentality, wherein someone who would never commit violence alone might do so in a crowd because it feels like their justified morality is being outsourced. What's disturbing is that it doesn't take much to trigger social proof, just a few planted ideas, a small group of imposters, a well-planned trend, and all of a sudden, the illusion becomes real. Once people believe something, even skeptics begin to believe it. What's worse is that the majority of people will be led to believe that they made the decision on their own, leading them to follow the crowd. Imagine for a second if I told you that someone could be rewriting your thoughts, beliefs, and memories right now without you knowing it. No force, no trickster now. It may sound like something out of a science fiction novel, but subtle, calculated influence is actually quite common. As an example, consider the 1971 Stanford prison experiment, one of the most notorious psychological experiments of all time. In the experiment, researchers at Stanford University divided 24 college students into two groups, guards and prisoners. No one was coerced or brainwashed, but within days, the guards turned into brutal, authoritarian, and even sadistic. They subjected the prisoners to humiliating treatment, put them in stressful positions, and even denied them basic necessities. The prisoners emotionally and mentally collapsed, accepting the abuse as real. This happened not because anyone ordered it, but because of psychological erosion, the gradual and insidious disappearance of personal identity under the right conditions. Isolation, the first step, removes people from their normal environment, making them vulnerable. Their reality narrows to whatever they're told. It's not only experiments or cults where this occurs. It's also government, corporations, and toxic relationships. When people stop questioning, the brain craves patterns, repetition, and familiarity. When you hear something enough, it starts to feel true even if it isn't. This is why propaganda and conspiracy theories circulate, and why some people defend beliefs that are actively harmful to them. Next, we have fear, which is a powerful tool in and of itself. When people are afraid, they seek security, and the easiest way to control them is to offer them certainty. Authoritarian leaders, cult leaders, manipulative partners, and the end-of-the-world prophecies all serve the same purpose: to keep you scared, dependent, and from thinking too much. Once fear takes hold, your mind narrows and stops questioning, and control is complete. Brainwashing is the darkest psychological trick of all because it makes you want to change, not because it forces you to, and by the time you realize what has happened, if you do, it will be too late. In today's world, many people appear to be completely devoid of reality. They defend the indefensible, believe unbelievable things, and reject even the most obvious truths. How does someone obtain to this point? What is brainwashing, and what are the practical steps that make someone so radical? The horrific Jonestown Massacre in 1978, where over 900 people, including children, died after drinking cyanide-laced punch under the orders of cult leader Jim Jones, is one of the most chilling real-world examples of the terrifying power and effectiveness of brainwashing. This wasn't a group of people who suddenly decided to follow a madman. They were conditioned step by step, a transformation conceivable. The power of brainwashing lies in its ability to overcome critical thinking and make individuals believe they are making their own choices. Rather than forcing someone to change, brainwashing makes them want to change. The process of brainwashing follows a pattern of isolation, destabilization, indoctrination, and reinforcement. Once it takes hold, escaping becomes nearly impossible. Isolation is the first step because when you control someone's information, you control their perception of reality. Jim Jones used this technique. By removing his adherents to a secluded Guyana compound, he effectively isolated them from the outside world. This phenomenon is common in extremist groups, media bubbles, and toxic relationships, where members are subjected to constant reinforcement of one viewpoint. When someone's worldview is heavily influenced by a single source, they become less likely to question it. As a result, destabilization sets in, weakening their mental defenses through exhaustion, fear, and confusion. Cults, on the other hand, employ lengthy sermons, erratic punishments, and emotional breakdowns while governments use. In cults, questioning the leader can lead to exile, but in real life, questioning certain ideologies can lead to social exclusion over time. The cycle of indoctrination begins with a constant crisis narrative that makes people feel like the world is too chaotic to understand without their guidance. As a person's mental energy drains, their reliance on the manipulator to make sense of things grows. After brainwashing is complete, the new identity is constantly reinforced through rituals, groupthink, and identity-based loyalty. People stop questioning their beliefs because they are now tied to their sense of self. They no longer feel brainwashed, but enlightened. Unfortunately, the scariest part is that brainwashing doesn't feel like brainwashing when it's happening to you. It feels like that's the truth, and it's why people stay in abusive groups, fall for mass manipulation, and blindly follow ideologies without questioning them. So, how can you protect yourself? Well, first, you need to be aware that brainwashing works by making critical thinking feel unnecessary or even dangerous. The moment you feel pressured not to question something, that's a red flag. Secondly, you should expose yourself to multiple perspectives. If you only hear one side of the story, you're being controlled even if you don't realize it. Lastly, just make sure to pay attention. When we let our emotions dictate our beliefs, we open ourselves up to manipulation, fear, guilt, and outrage. When we question why we think a certain way, we often find that our rational thinking has been rewritten. For example, when someone tells us we're insane, at first we would reject them because we trust our own judgment. However, as time goes on, we may begin to overreact, become irrational, or become a difficult person. The term gaslighting originates from a 1944 film in which a husband successfully manipulates his wife into believing something she never believed possible. It's a psychological weapon that makes you question your own perception of reality and erases the truth in favor of something more convenient for the manipulator. The worst part is that by the time you realize what's happening, if you ever do, you're already trapped. His goal is to make her doubt herself to the point that she becomes dependent on him. So he dims the lights in their home and denies that anything has changed. This isn't just a movie trope. It's a real manipulation tactic used in toxic relationships, cults, politics, and corporations. Gaslighting begins subtly, but the manipulator eventually denies things they've said or done, even when proof is available. At first you fight back, but eventually your confidence is eroded by constantly hearing the same denials. Then they start attacking your capacity to think clearly, and you start to doubt your own judgment, thinking that maybe you are the problem. Then they move on to emotional manipulation, where any reaction you have is dismissed. Why are you so sensitive? You always exaggerate things. The goal is to make you question your right to feel the way you do. You begin to question your own emotions and apologize when you shouldn't. The last stage is when the gas wardens isolate you from outside influences. They tell you your friends are making you paranoid and that your family doesn't understand you. But gradually, they become the only authority on what's real. They no longer need to manipulate you, so you stop questioning them and silence your own doubts before they even start. When someone manipulates you into believing their version of events, it's not because you want to, but because your mind has stopped believing it can disagree. Gaslighting is terrifying because it changes who you are and makes you give control to someone else without realizing it. By the time you see the truth, if you ever do, it feels impossible to break free because you don't know what to fight back with. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. In every hostage situation, the victim should be terrified of their captor, hate them, and fight to escape. However, in some strange cases, the opposite happens. Instead of running away, the victim starts protecting their captor, trusting them, and even loving them. This phenomenon is known as Stockholm Syndrome, and it originated from a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden. Four hostages were held captive in a vault for 6 days, feeling helpless and terrified. When the police finally rescued them, something unusual transpired. The world was amazed that the hostages, instead of expressing gratitude to their rescuers, sided with their captors. One even went so far as to raise money for their legal defense. This isn't an isolated incident. Victims of kidnapping, cults, abusive relationships, and prisoner of war camps often experience Stockholm Syndrome, which isn't a sign of weakness, but rather a survival mechanism. When a person feels trapped and powerless, their brain stops seeking ways to fight and starts. As a result of the captor's complete control over their every move, from food to whether they live or die, the victim's mind undergoes a disturbing process. It rewires fear into attachment. The victim begins to see their captor as a savior, rather than an oppressor, due to the small acts of mercy. For example, a kidnapper letting their hostage eat, an abuser apologizing after an outburst, or a cult leader offering protection from exterior dangers. In this distorted reality, the victim's sense of self begins to deteriorate as they become isolated from the outside world and forced to rely solely on their captor's words. They stop questioning and start justifying, which is why abuse victims often defend their abusers. Hostages sometimes refuse to escape even when given the chance. It's not about logic, it's about survival. Lastly, dependency locks the victim in a place when their only way to stay safe is to keep their captain happy. They stop thinking for themselves and accept their fate. When people experience Stockholm Syndrome, they may find themselves bending reality to protect their captors or defending themselves from their own suffering. What's worse is that most people don't realize it's happening to them until it's too late, which fosters dependence. Cult leaders, abusive partners, and authoritarian regimes rarely use this tactic, which is why it's so terrifying. Physical restraints that are unnecessary. The most effective method of controlling someone isn't to lock them up, but to convince them that they can't live without you. This is known as the dark art of engineered dependence, a psychological ploy to make individuals give up their autonomy and control to another person by appealing to their fundamental need for connection. The process begins with gradually eliminating choices, not by force but through subtle manipulation of a partner. It starts as a suggestion, but it quickly turns into a rule and then a belief until you look around and realize there are no people left. Isolation and dependence ensue, with the manipulator becoming your sole source of validation, approval, security, and even basic needs. The group warns that your family is toxic and you should cut them out of your life. A leader whispers that only they know the truth. This tactic has been used for a long time. In extreme cases, it involves controlling a person's finances, decisions, and even their movement. The victim stops making choices for themselves, not because they don't want to, but because they've been taught they can't. Here's the important part. The victim thinks it's their choice. They aren't locked away or physically restrained, but they stay because leaving feels like jumping off a cliff. There is no need to force someone to stay when they are already so broken. Cults isolate members from loved ones, making the leader the only reliable source of information. Abusive partners break self-confidence to the point where the victim believes they are worthless. Totalitarian governments censor information to make their citizens feel helpless outside of the system. And once someone's identity has been shattered, they will hesitate to leave, even when the doors are wide open. In 1973, Patty Hearst, a wealthy heiress, was abducted by a militant group known as the Symbian Liberation Army. Initially, she resisted, but after being beaten, locked in a dark closet, and isolated for weeks, something terrible occurred months later. She was seen robbing a bank alongside her captors. The world was shocked. How does one go from being a victim to willingly committing such a heinous crime? These crimes were committed by the same individuals who tortured them. What unfolded was more than just a hostage situation. It was a classic example of psychological breakdown. When subjected to repeated punishment, failure, or isolation, the mind adapts in a disturbing way. The individual stops viewing escape as an option. Even when the door is wide open, they don't run. This isn't just a theory. Psychologists initially found it in an experiment with dogs, where they placed the animals in cages with electric flaws at. At first, the dogs attempted to flee, but after being shocked multiple times with no way out, they eventually gave up. The worst part is that when the door to their cage was opened, they stayed. This is the power of psychological manipulation. Victims stay even when they have a way out. How does this happen to humans? It starts with unpredictable rewards and punishments. One day, the captor is nice, and the next, they're cruel. The victim has no idea what to expect, and their brain gets stuck in survival mode, too worn out to think clearly enough to act rationally. After resisting, the victim may experience self-doubt as their manipulator gradually undermines their confidence by telling them they are weak, foolish, and incapable. Eventually, the victim may come to believe that they need their abuser for survival. The next stage is isolation, as the victim loses touch with friends, family, and outside perspectives, and their thoughts start to be controlled by their captor. Lastly, the victim may become dependent on their abuser for. At this point, they may not merely accept their captivity, they may even rebel against it, as Patty Hearst did. They don't merely remain, they become active participants in their own entanglement. This is why some people stay in abusive relationships, why war prisoners develop emotional bonds with their captors, and why members of high control groups are kept submissive. It's not a sign of weakness or stupidity, but of survival. When someone is trained to, love bombing at first feels like something out of a movie. The attention is intoxicating and overwhelming. You finally found someone who sees you, really sees you. They flood you with compliments, send constant texts telling you that you're special and that they've never met anyone like you. The most dangerous thing a manipulator steals is someone's belief that freedom was ever possible. It's not about real affection, but rather a carefully constructed illusion. Love bombing works by hijacking the brain's reward system. When someone floods you with extreme positivity, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in addiction. It's a dangerous high, an emotional rush that feels impossible to control. Just when you think you've nailed it in a relationship, with lavish gifts, rapid intimacy, or declarations of love, the real trick starts, the reversal. Once the victim is hooked, the good morning texts stop, the warmth fades, and the compliments turn into cold indifference or worse criticism. This happens in friendships, workplaces, and other relationships as well. Intense affection followed by sudden emotional starvation is a common cycle in relationships. It happens when the person who made you feel special suddenly pulls away, leaving you to wonder what went wrong. Instead of recognizing the pattern, the victim blames themselves, analyzes every conversation, lowers their boundaries, and works harder to fix what they think they did wrong. They chase the affection, not realizing that the honeymoon phase was never real. A psychological trap known as intermittent reinforcement is at work here. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. The victim is in a constant state of anticipation, enduring increasingly harsh treatment in the hopes of experiencing that initial rush of euphoria again. This tactic is employed by narcissists in relationships, cult leaders to maintain obedience among their followers, and toxic bosses to manipulate employees into loyalty. Fear is the oldest form of control. It overcomes logic, crushes independent thought, and turns people into willing followers. When someone is afraid, they don't analyze, question, or seek safety, which is why fear-mongering and anxiety induction are among the most dangerous psychological tricks ever used. By the time they realize the pattern, it's too late, and they're exhausted, alone, and doubting their own instincts. One of the most notorious instances of fear being used as a weapon to control entire populations was the Salem witch trials in the late 1600s. The town was consumed by paranoia, with people believing that witches were hiding among them. As a result, neighbors began to accuse each other, accusations spread like wildfire, and people started confessing to crimes they didn't commit just to avoid execution. Those who didn't confess were still sentenced to death, and fear had no say in the matter. It's as simple as manipulating them into self-destruction. It's all too common. A manipulative boss can keep employees from complaining because they're afraid of losing their jobs. An abusive partner can make someone believe the world is dangerous, so they won't leave. Politicians and media outlets also play on people's fears, constantly warning of impending disaster and the need for a savior. Fear-based marketing is so effective because it takes advantage of the fact that when we're anxious, our amygdala brain region, which is responsible for processing threats, goes into survival mode. Our logical thinking shuts down, and we become hyper-focused on avoiding danger. In this state, whoever offers us a way out, be it a leader, a product, or a belief system, becomes the person we cling to for security. Without this cream, you'll age faster. Without this insurance, you'll be bankrupt. And without this security system, you won't be safe in your own home. The most terrifying aspect of fear-driven manipulation is that it feels like concern, preparation, or a necessary precaution, not manipulation. However, if someone is continually feeding your fears, making you anxious, and offering themselves as the only solution, that's when it becomes real. In order to control someone without using force, threats, or raising your voice, all you need to do is make them feel guilty. Guilt, tripping, and shame inducement are extremely effective psychological weapons that can transform people into puppets without them realizing it. The victim believes they're being controlled because they're being led astray by those in power, seeming to be acting freely when in fact their emotions are being controlled like puppet strings. Consider all the times you've agreed to do something despite being exhausted because you were afraid you'd feel terrible if you said no. Perhaps you apologized for something that wasn't your fault or stayed in a toxic relationship because you knew that if you left, you'd feel terrible about yourself. This is the power of guilt tripping, and it's terrifyingly effective. How about this? Manipulators subtly sow the seed of guilt by distorting reality in such a way that the victim feels responsible for their own suffering. For example, a parent may say, "After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me," a friend may say. "I suppose I just don't matter to you anymore," a partner may say. "I sacrifice so much for this relationship, and you're just going to walk away." None of these statements give the victim direct instructions. Instead, the burden of guilt takes over. However, guilt isn't always sufficient. Shame is where guilt comes in. Inducement enters the picture when guilt makes you feel bad about something you did, and shame makes you feel bad about who you are. Instead of thinking, "You forgot my birthday," when someone internalizes shame, they stop fighting back. It's no longer that they feel like they did something wrong. It's that they are wrong. Cult leaders, abusive partners, manipulative bosses, and others employ this tactic to break their victims. The most terrifying aspect of guilt tripping is that it doesn't just come from other people. We learn to do it to ourselves. When we hear these voices so frequently, they become a part of our inner monologue, telling us that we are flawed, owe you something, and never good enough. As a result, we spend our lives trying to prove otherwise, staying in situations we shouldn't, agreeing to things we don't want, and chasing after approval that will never really come. The first step in breaking free from self-shaming is to recognize the pattern. Ask yourself if you're acting out of genuine desire or if you're afraid of being perceived as selfish, ungrateful, or a disappointment. Notice if you are accepting blame that isn't yours or if you're constantly seeking approval that never seems to go away. You shouldn't say no, and you should be a better person. You don't deserve to be happy. Emotional black magic is a powerful psychological trick that can cause people to betray their values, remain in toxic relationships, and feel trapped in their own lives. It's not hypnosis or mind control, but something much worse. What's even scarier is that most people don't even realize it's happening to them. Imagine a mother who uses this technique on her children. The mother tells her child, "I don't know how I'll survive if you leave me and move away." Her partner says, "If you really loved me, you would question me." Her friend warns, "After everything I've done for you, you owe me." These statements aren't simply attempts at guilt trips. They're calculated forms of control. Psychological manipulation, also known as emotional blackmail, occurs when someone uses your emotions, such as fear, guilt, and obligation, to get what they want. They don't ask, don't force, but instead make you feel cruel and selfish if you refuse. The power dynamics in organized crime, such as the mafia, have long relied on emotional blackmail. Instead of resorting solely to threats of violence, they have long exploited family ties, unspoken debts, and small favors to keep members of their organization obedient. Before you know it, you're being pressured into doing things you never wanted to do because saying no feels impossible. Betraying someone by refusing to reciprocate is a form of emotional blackmail. The idea of leaving isn't just dangerous, it's made to feel morally wrong. This kind of blackmail isn't exclusive to criminal organizations. It happens in all kinds of relationships, from aims to workplaces where employees are made to feel guilty for setting boundaries, and it always follows a. Here's a pattern that manipulators often use. They make a subtle or direct demand, but instead of asking for what they want, they set a trap. Then, they make you feel guilty, afraid, or obligated, which can lead them to act hurt, explode in anger, or withdraw affection. Eventually, they offer a way out. Just do what they say, and everything will be fine. The problem is that it feels like saying no will ruin everything. So how can you break free? You start by recognizing when someone makes. Feeling like your emotions are being used against you? Take a step back if setting boundaries leads to threats, guilt trips, or emotional punishment. You're being manipulated. The key to breaking free isn't arguing, justifying, or explaining. It's refusing to play their game. Here's the disturbing truth. Emotional blackmailers crave control, not love, fairness, or respect. When they realize they can't control you anymore, they either escalate their tactics or move on to someone else. Memory manipulation is a kind of emotional blackmail. Imagine for a second a world where some of your most vivid memories, the ones you hold in such high esteem, could be entirely false. It would sound like something out of a science fiction novel, but the truth is that the human mind is incredibly malleable and susceptible to manipulation, making memory a prime instrument for control. As an example, in a now infamous Lost in the Mall experiment conducted by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, participants were led to believe that they were transported to a different location than they actually had. Myths about my childhood, some true and some entirely made up. For example, in one, the subjects claimed to have been lost in a shopping mall when they were younger. At first, they didn't remember this at all, but after some gentle prodding, they started to recall specifics like who found them, what the mall looked like, and how it felt. They insisted it had happened, even though it hadn't. Their minds had filled in the blanks, creating an entirely false memory. This wasn't simply people forgetting, it was memory being. The way our brains store memories isn't ideal. Instead, we piece together fragments, fill in gaps, and unconsciously alter details whenever we recall an event. The scary thing is that the more we recall an event, the less accurate it becomes. This means that someone with the right kind of influence can change your past. They can alter your memories, your emotions, and even your perception of what happened. One powerful tool for shaping memory is social agreement, which can be achieved through simple suggestions like, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Or, "I remember it differently, this causes doubt," which, in an effort to maintain consistency, causes your brain to adjust its recoil to match the new version of events. Over time, you begin to accept this false memory as your own. In abusive relationships, manipulative partners can rewrite history to convince victims they were responsible for things they never did, as can governments, all because the brain prefers collective certainty over individual doubt. This isn't just a harmless quirk of the mind. History is rife with terrifying examples of memory manipulation in criminal cases, where interrogators have extracted false confessions by reconstructing events until the accused believes in his or her own guilt. Historical narratives have been manipulated by propaganda machines, changing public perception to suit their agendas. Memory is crucial for our identity, shaping our beliefs and how we perceive the world. But what happens when someone else controls our memories? If our past can be changed, our future can be altered as well. And by the time we realize it, it's too late. This psychological trick called triangulation is so subtle that it can make even the most confident person anxious. As a classic move in manipulative relationships, a controlling partner would casually mention how attractive the other person is, which creates tension, competition, or insecurity. This causes people to question their worth, relationships, and even their grasp on reality, all without them realizing it. Jealousy induction is another powerful manipulation tactic used in toxic relationships, workplaces, and politics. At first, it may just be a comment, a story, or an innocent observation, but as time goes on, the victim begins to compete for validation, feels replaceable, works harder to prove themselves, stops caring about the health of the relationship, and starts obsessing over how to be good enough. And finally, the manipulator resorts to direct manipulation by comparing the victim to an ex and suggesting they aren't measuring up. The next step, jealousy induction, involves manipulative behavior that goes beyond simply mentioning a third party. Instead, the manipulative person actively creates doubt and insecurity by flirting with their partner, praising someone else excessively, and making sure their victim sees the attention they supposedly receive. The victim becomes more desperate for reassurance with each calculated move because, as they feel more unstable, they're easier to control. This behavior is not limited to romantic relationships. It happens in workplaces as well. In politics, leaders divide people into factions and pit them against each other to maintain power, while in families, parents compare their children, creating rivalry instead of connection. This works because humans are hardwired for social validation. When someone we care about or respect suddenly introduces competition, our brains go into survival mode, seeking reassurance and wanting to be chosen, which makes us vulnerable. Willing to do anything to regain favor. The true danger of triangulation is how it rewires thinking. It shifts the victim's focus from, is this relationship good for me, to what can I do to be good enough? It fosters paranoia, self-doubt, and emotional dependence, all while making the manipulator seem desirable, powerful, or in control. So, how do you stop at first? Recognize the pattern. If someone is making you feel like you're in constant competition, step back and ask who benefits from this. Healthy relationships don't require you to prove. Triangulation is a control game that relies on insecurities to keep people emotionally unstable and seeking approval. Once you recognize it for what it is, you don't have to play. The moment you refuse to play, the game ends. Lastly, prioritize self-worth. The stronger your sense of value, the harder it is for someone to manipulate you with comparison and jealousy. Everyone has insecurities, those little sneaking doubts that make you wonder things like, am I good enough? Do they really like me? What if I fail? Now, picture someone knowing all about those insecurities and manipulating you based on them. It's a dark psychological trick, but it happens in relationships, workplaces, politics, and even in the ads you see every day. One of the most striking examples is Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, which he didn't merely steal from. In order to amass billions of dollars, he preyed on wealthy investors' fears of missing out. Once he had them hooked, he used their greed, self-doubt, and desire for status to his advantage, and they continued to give him money even when warning signs were everywhere. Here's how the scam works. He finds out what his victims want, then uses subtle manipulation to make them feel unattractive, leading them to seek out his services. Validating a boss's suggestion that you're replaceable motivates you to work harder. For less, of friends, continual reminders of your past failures serve to keep you in check, the goal being to make you dependent on their reassurance, approval, and protection. The problem is that when someone makes you feel inadequate, you begin to doubt your own worth and are willing to go to extreme lengths to prove it, even if it means sacrificing your own happiness. What's worse is that they control the supply of validation they provide. It's not just corporations that use this trick. Families, friendships, and even influencers can fall victim to it. Social media platforms feed algorithms that prey on insecurity, showing you ads that make you feel ugly, unsuccessful, or like you're falling behind. Companies sell you solutions to problems you didn't even know you had until they pointed them out. When someone's words or actions make you feel small, uncertain, or like you have something to prove, it's important to recognize the pattern and ask yourself if they're actually trying to empower you or if they're just trying to control you. This is especially true in toxic relationships, where the parent is always reminding the child that they'd be nothing without them. Jealous friends and partners can also contribute to this downward spiral by downplaying your accomplishments and making you feel lucky to have them. Assist you in developing personally, or are they causing you to rely on their approval? Secondly, separate your self-confidence from their control. When you do this, it becomes more difficult for them to manipulate you. Lastly, keep in mind that no one genuinely cares about you will ever take advantage of your weaknesses. The worst part about this deceitful tactic is not that people fall for it, but that they frequently fail to recognize when it's happening, leading to devastating consequences. Psychological manipulation involves tricks that don't involve anger or threats. Instead, it involves pulling you back in just when you're about to break free. This tactic is called hoovering, and it's used by manipulators, emotional abusers, and narcissists who can't stand to let go of control. The term comes from the Hoover vacuum cleaner, which is literally what this manipulation does. The tactic is effective because it relies on the belief that things will change for the better. As an example, consider Charles Manson and his cult members. Rather than resorting to threats, Manson would entice family members to return by showing them affection, validating their feelings, and creating a false sense of belonging. Manson would make them feel special and irreplaceable, and he would convince them that the outside world would never understand them the way he did. The goal wasn't just to get them back, but also to have them voluntarily relinquish control. It's the same old story every time, but how does hoovering work? First, the manipulator uses the love bomb to overwhelm you with affection. They claim to have changed, remember your favorite songs, send nostalgic messages, and remind you of the good times. Then, if love doesn't work, they use the pity bomb to make you feel guilty. They claim to be struggling, maybe depressed, sick, or going through a crisis. Feel responsible for their suffering. They don't ask you to come back outright, but they make sure you feel like a bad person if you don't. The anger hoover, and if guilt fails, they lash out, they blame you, call you heartless, try to make you jealous by posting about how much happier they are without you. But the goal isn't to move on, it's to provoke a reaction, any reaction, to keep you emotionally hooked. And here's why it works: the brain craves closure every moment of kindness makes you forget the cruelty every moment of cruelty makes. Once you realize that hoovering isn't an honest effort to reconnect, but a control tactic, you can take steps to protect yourself. For example, you can cut off all contact, avoid engaging, and recognize that hoovering only works when there's a response. When there isn't, the manipulator loses control. Walking away is hard, but staying in the grip of someone you're controlling is much easier. Whether it's a medieval village gathering to mock a criminal in the stocks or a social media mob tearing someone's reputation apart, the psychology behind public shaming remains the same. The only way to win is to not participate in the game of public shaming, which has been successfully used for centuries as a tool of control. In the Salem witch trials of 1692, for example, a large number of women who had no basis in evidence were falsely accused of being witches and coerced into confessing under intense public pressure. The accusations were based on hysteria and fear rather than evidence. But once someone became a target, their fate was sealed because reason vanishes when a crowd forms. But why does Why does public humiliation work so effectively? Because it taps into one of our most fundamental fears, social rejection. As social beings, we need to feel connected to others in order to thrive. In the past, being exiled from a tribe could mean death. Even though we don't physically exile people anymore, the fear of being totally alone, despised, and powerless is the same biological terror that motivates public humiliation. In the workplace, when an employee is publicly berated for an error. In relationships, when one partner publicly berates the other in front of friends. This is a power move meant to make the victim feel small, weak, and dependent on the offender or group. Here's where the psychological trap grows. After the humiliation, many victims try to regain acceptance from their abuser rather than fight back, which makes them even more susceptible to manipulation. Lastly, with the rise of social media, this phenomenon has become more public. Shaming to a new level, a single mistake, a poorly worded tweet, a misunderstood joke. Within hours, thousands of strangers become judges, juries, and executioners. The larger the crowd, the less individual responsibility anyone feels. It becomes a feeding frenzy of outrage. And once someone has been branded as bad, the internet rarely forgives. But public shaming isn't just about punishing individuals, it's about controlling everyone else. When someone is humiliated in front of others, it sends a warning step out of line, and the power of shame begins to weaken the moment you recognize its purpose, to control you through fear. Refusing to engage with it, standing your ground, and rejecting the guilt trap are the strongest ways to break free. This could be you. Social norms are enforced not because they're right, but because the fear of humiliation is stronger than the will to resist. So, how can you protect yourself from public shaming? As soon as you stop believing that you deserve it, the spell is broken and public humiliation begins to divide and conquer two people who were once inseparable. The trust they had built up over the years begins to crack, not because of anything they did, but because someone else wanted it that way. Rumors, twisted truths, and small calculated actions are used to drive a wedge between them. And once it's deep, it's too late. Sufficient, the one who sowed it becomes the owner of the match. This is divide and conquer, a manipulation strategy so effective that it has been used for centuries to control groups, dismantle alliances, and consolidate power. It works by breaking apart unity, making sure people are too distracted by conflict to notice who's pulling the strings. History is full of examples. The British Empire used this strategy to control vast territories, turning local groups against each other. So they were too busy fighting among themselves to challenge colonial rule. Authoritarian leaders do the same, stoking division among their people, whether through political factions, social groups, or manufactured outrage, to prevent anyone from uniting against them. But this isn't just a strategy used on grand scales. It happens in everyday life. A manipulative boss pits employees against each other, ensuring no one trusts their coworkers enough to push back against unfair treatment. A toxic partner creates tension between their significant other and their friends or family, making sure they become the only trusted influence. Narcissists thrive on this trick, subtly spreading misinformation to make sure no one around them forms a strong enough bond to resist their control. The key is isolation. When people no longer trust each other, they become dependent on the manipulator. They seek validation, approval, and direction from the only person who seems reliable, the one who caused the division in the first place. That's when control is complete. And the scariest part, it doesn't take outright lies to work, just a small distortion of the truth, a missing piece of context, a carefully timed exaggeration. The result, allies turn into enemies, and the one pulling the strings remains untouchable. Scapegoating. History repeats itself, not because people don't learn, but because manipulation works. And one of the oldest, most dangerous psychological tricks is scapegoating, the art of blaming a single person or group for problems they didn't create. It's a tactic so powerful that it has fueled witch hunts, toppled governments, and destroyed countless lives. A perfect example, the Salem witch trials in the late 1600s. Paranoia gripped the Massachusetts Bay Colony, strange illnesses, crop failures, rising tensions. People needed answers. And instead of facing the complexities of reality, they turned to a simple, chilling conclusion: witchcraft. Dozens of people, mostly women, were accused with little to no evidence. Neighbors betrayed neighbors. Executions followed. And yet the real problem, the fear and instability brewing beneath the surface, remained untouched, because scapegoating isn't about finding the truth. It's about controlling the narrative. So why does it work so well? Because people crave simple answers to complex problems. When things go wrong, whether in a family, a workplace, or an entire nation, it's easier to believe there's a single villain behind it all. Admitting that problems are complicated, that they might not have one neat explanation, is uncomfortable. Blame brings relief. It gives people the illusion of understanding, even if that understanding is completely false. And this trick isn't just used in history books. Blame shifting, a smaller but equally dangerous version, happens every day. A cheating partner accuses their spouse of being paranoid. A corrupt politician blames the media for their downfall. A failing CEO pins the company's collapse on lazy employees. It's a psychological sleight of hand, redirecting attention so the real problem stays hidden. And the more this trick is used, the harder it becomes to see the truth. The scapegoat becomes the distraction. The real causes of the problem remain untouched, and people become so invested in their blame that they reject any evidence that contradicts it. This is how entire groups have been persecuted throughout history, not because of what they did, but because someone needed a villain. So, how do you avoid falling into this trap? Look beyond the obvious. If a problem is being reduced to a single enemy, ask yourself, who benefits from this? What's being ignored while all attention is focused on the scapegoat? And most importantly, are you being manipulated into believing an easy lie over a difficult truth? Because the most effective form of control isn't force, it's fear. And when that fear is given a face, a name, a scapegoat, it becomes the perfect weapon. Authority bias. In 1961, an experiment took place that revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature. Psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how far people would go when following orders from an authority figure. Participants were led to believe they were part of a learning study. Their task: to administer electric shocks to another person every time they answered a question incorrectly. With each mistake, the shocks grew stronger, escalating from mild discomfort to agonizing pain. The person being shocked screamed, pleaded, even fell silent. But here's the catch: they weren't real. They were actors pretending to suffer. Yet most participants kept pressing the button. They hesitated, they looked uneasy, but when the man in the white lab coat told them to continue, they did. 2/3 of them followed instructions to the very end, delivering what they believed to be potentially fatal shocks, simply because an authority figure told them to. This is authority bias, our instinctive tendency to trust and obey those we see as powerful, knowledgeable, or in charge. It's the same psychological mechanism that makes us follow doctors' orders without question, believe news anchors without verifying facts, or obey workplace policies even when they don't make sense. But in the wrong hands, this instinct can be exploited, overriding morality, logic, and even self-preservation. History is full of examples. Corrupt governments have used blind obedience to justify atrocities. Corporations have suppressed whistleblowers by enforcing rigid hierarchies. Cult leaders have demanded absolute loyalty, convincing followers to surrender their freedom, their money, even their lives. Authority bias works because the brain takes shortcuts. Instead of questioning every decision, it assumes authority figures know best. A uniform, a title, a badge, these symbols create an illusion of infallibility, and the more confident an authority figure appears, the harder it becomes to challenge them. This is why scammers pose as police officers to extort money, why historical medical figures convince people to accept harmful treatments, why soldiers in war zones have carried out unthinkable orders, because refusing wasn't an option, and the effect becomes even stronger when obedience is combined with fear, when an authority figure not only commands, but also threatens, whether subtly or openly. Resistance becomes nearly impossible. People comply even when they know something is wrong because defying authority feels dangerous. The most disturbing part You don't even need real authority to exploit this bias. Just the illusion of it, a uniform, a fake badge, a confident tone, these are often enough to make people comply. Without question, the most effective tricks don't force people into submission. They make them willingly hand over control. Groupthink induction. One of the most dangerous psychological tricks isn't about manipulating a single person. It's about without influencing entire groups until questioning the consensus feels impossible. It doesn't force people to agree. Instead, it creates an environment where disagreement feels like betrayal. And once that happens, people stop thinking critically even when the decisions being made are obviously flawed. Imagine a high-stakes corporate meeting. A company is about to launch a product, and everything points to disaster. Market research shows customers won't buy it. Engineers warn about technical failures, and some executives have private doubts, but in the room there's nothing but agreement. No one speaks up, no one challenges the decision, not because they don't see the problem, but because no one wants to be the outlier. This is groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where the need for unity overrides logic, skepticism, and even self-preservation. When people are part of a group, they instinctively prioritize harmony. Dissent feels uncomfortable. Doubt makes you an outsider, and when the loudest, most dominant voice is set, the tone everyone else follows, often without realizing it happens. Gradually, maybe an authority figure expresses a strong opinion and others instinctively align with it. Maybe the group values agreement so much that disagreeing feels like an attack. Over time, the pressure to conform becomes stronger than the pressure to be right. People suppress their doubts, rationalize bad ideas, and convince themselves that if everyone else agrees, it must be the right decision, and the consequence is disastrous. History is full of catastrophic decisions fueled by groupthink: failed military invasions, financial collapses, political disasters. Moments where in hindsight the flaws were obvious, but no one spoke up when it mattered. And the most dangerous part, inside the groupthink bubble, people don't feel manipulated. They believe they're thinking for themselves, but in reality, they're just echoing the voices around them, cultivating a false identity. Some manipulators don't just lie, they become the lie. They shape their identities to fit whatever will make people trust them, molding themselves into whoever they need to be. This isn't just deception, it's performance, and when done well, it's nearly impossible to detect. Frank Abagnale, the real-life con artist behind Catch Me If You Can, pulled off one of the most audacious identity scams in history. Before the age of 21, he had successfully posed as a pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer, bluffing his way into positions of authority with nothing but charm, confidence, and carefully chosen details. His entire persona was an illusion, but it worked because he understood a fundamental truth: people don't question what looks real enough. We instinctively judge others based on surface-level cues. Someone who acts like they belong, who speaks with conviction, who looks the part. Our brains fill in the gaps, assuming they must be who they claim to be. A skilled manipulator doesn't just tell lies, they create a version of themselves that people want to believe. And once they establish a false identity, something strange happens. The illusion feeds itself. Others begin reinforcing it, vouching for the manipulator, defending them, even ignoring red flags. If enough people believe the lie, becomes reality. Cult leaders convince their followers of divine wisdom. Scammers build reputations that seem untouchable. Even entire societies have been swayed by figures who were never who they claim to be. A false identity doesn't just fool others, it can warp the manipulator's own sense of reality. When someone fully embraces their fabricated persona, the line between deception and truth disappears for them and for everyone around them. And once that happens, even they may no longer know what's real. The seeds of self-doubt. You don't need chains to keep someone trapped. Sometimes all it takes is a whisper in their mind, one that makes them question everything they once knew about themselves. The most insidious form of control doesn't come from force or coercion. It comes from planting a simple thought: what if I'm not good enough? This is the art of sowing self-doubt, a psychological trick that can dismantle confidence, reshape reality, and keep someone locked in a cycle of second-guessing themselves. And the worst part, once the seed is planted, most people water it themselves. A classic example, the infamous Pilgrim experiment. While it's often remembered for obedience to authority, there's something more subtle at play. Participants weren't just pressured into shocking others, they were gradually led to doubt their own moral instincts. At first they resisted, but after being repeatedly told it's fine, keep going, you have to do this, many began to question their own judgment. If they hesitated, the authority figure reassured them, and with each step forward, their resistance weakened. By the end, they weren't just following orders, they had convinced themselves that their hesitation was misplaced, that maybe they were overreacting. That's how self-doubt works. It doesn't strike all at once, it seeps in slowly, often through calculated strategic manipulation. It can start with a simple comment. Are you sure that's the right choice? That doesn't sound like you. You always mess things up like this. When repeated enough, it forces the brain to spiral. It makes people look for evidence that maybe, just maybe, those doubts are true. And once someone starts believing it, their confidence collapses like a house of cards. Skilled manipulators use this to control others without ever lifting a finger. If you make someone doubt themselves enough, they'll look to you for validation. They'll become dependent on your approval, constantly seeking reassurance that they're making the right choices. Over time, they lose trust in their own judgment and start deferring to the person who knows better. This is how toxic relationships thrive. It's how abusers keep their victims trapped. It's how cult leaders maintain absolute authority. But here's the most terrifying part. Self-doubt, once ingrained, doesn't just go away. Even if the manipulator disappears, the seeds they planted continue to grow. The voice of doubt remains whispering, maybe they were right about me. And that's why this trick is so dangerous. It doesn't just break people, it makes them break themselves, exploiting mirror neurons. You yawn when someone else yawns. You laugh when a room erupts in laughter. Your brain isn't just observing, it's mirroring. And while this instinct fuels human connection, it can also be turned against you in ways you'd never suspect. At the core of this manipulation are mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that fire not just when you act, but when you see someone else acting. These neurons are why you flinch when someone gets hurt or instinctively smile. When someone smiles at you, they're the foundation of empathy, bonding, and social influence. But like any powerful tool, they can be weaponized. One of the most infamous examples, the rise of adult Hitler. Hitler didn't just give speeches, he mirrored the emotions of his audience. He reflected their fears, frustrations, and hopes back at them. His speeches weren't just words, they were emotional feedback loops amplified by the crowd's response. He didn't persuade with logic, he made people feel. And once emotion takes over, critical thinking shuts down. But mirroring doesn't need a massive crowd to work. Salespeople, politicians, cult leaders, and con artists use it constantly. A manipulator will subtly copy your posture, tone, and gestures to make you feel at ease. Your brain registers the similarity and assumes this person is like me, I can trust them. It's why a skilled con artist can make you spill your secrets within minutes of meeting them. They're not just listening, they're reflecting you back to yourself. And this trick goes deeper. Mirroring can manufacture attraction, and loyalty studies show that when someone subtly mimics your body language, you're more likely to like them, trust them, and agree with them, even if you just met. This is how toxic relationships begin. An abuser may start by mirroring their victim's personality, interests, and values, creating an illusion of perfect compatibility. But once that bond is established, the manipulation shifts. The abuser no longer mirrors, but controls, knowing their victim is too emotionally invested to leave. And this trick isn't just used by individuals, it's built into the systems we interact with every day. Social media algorithms act as digital mirror neurons. Ever notice how platforms feed you content that aligns with your existing beliefs? That's not an accident. The algorithm reflects back what you already think and feel, strengthening your biases and filtering out anything that challenges them. Over time, this creates echo chambers, polarization, and an inability to see other perspectives. So how do you protect yourself? First, recognize when you're being mirrored. If someone copies your mannerisms too closely or reflects your emotions too perfectly, pause and question their intentions. Second, disrupt the pattern, change your posture, shift topics, or introduce an unexpected idea. A genuine person will flow naturally. With the Asian, a manipulator will struggle. They rely on predictability to maintain control. Mirror neurons make us human. They help us connect, learn, and empathize. But in the wrong hands, they become a tool for manipulation, turning your own instincts against you. And the most Terrifying part, when done, well, you won't even realize it's happening. Exploiting empathy, most people see empathy as a strength, the foundation of trust, connection, and human kindness. But in the wrong hands, it's a weapon, one that can be twisted, exploited, and used to control. The most dangerous manipulators don't force their victims into submission. They make them feel like they're choosing it. Take Munchausen syndrome. By proxy, a disturbing example of weaponized empathy. A caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care, often than a child, convincing them that they're sick. The victim suffers real pain, becomes completely dependent, and never questions the person hurting them because they believe they're being helped. Meanwhile, the abuser enjoys the sympathy, attention, and control that come from being seen as a devoted caretaker. This is how manipulators trap people, using their own compassion against them. The trick is simple: create a problem that makes someone feel responsible, then present yourself as the only solution. It starts with subtle guilt statements like, "You're the only one who understands me. If you leave, I don't know what I'll do." The goal: make the target feel irreplaceable while slowly eroding their autonomy. And if someone resists, that's where compassion fatigue comes in. The manipulator increases their emotional demands, overwhelming their victim until they break down from exhaustion. At some point, giving in feels easier than resisting. And this technique is everywhere. Cults convince followers to abandon their lives for a greater purpose, framing doubt as selfishness. Toxic relationships trap 1. Partner in endless cycles of pity and guilt, forcing them to stay. Scammers pose as victims, sending desperate messages that make you feel like you're the only person who can help. And the scariest part, the more empathetic someone is, the easier they are to manipulate. Because once your compassion becomes an obligation, you stop seeing the trap and start justifying the chain's obligation. A small favor can feel harmless, even thoughtful. Someone buys you lunch, and the next time you feel an unspoken need to return the gesture. A friend helps you move, and suddenly you hesitate when they ask for a favor. Even if it's inconvenient, it's not forced, it's not demanded. But the weight of obligation lingers. This instinct, the need to reciprocate kindness, is natural. It holds friendships together, builds trust, and keeps social exchanges fair. But when used as a tool for control, it becomes something else entirely. In the 1970s, members of the Hare Krishna movement stood in airports, handing out flowers to strangers. No catch, no expectation, just a gift. But moments later, they would ask for a donation, and most people, even those who didn't want a flower, gave the money not because they had to, but because they felt they should. A simple act of generosity became a carefully crafted trap, bringing in millions of dollars from people who simply didn't want to seem ungrateful. This is how the reciprocity principle works. It doesn't demand, it makes you feel like saying no is wrong. It starts with small things: a compliment, a favor, a helping hand, until the sense of debt grows. And when someone calls in that debt, rejecting them feels like breaking an unspoken contract. In personal relationships, this kind of obligation can turn into quiet manipulation. A partner showers you with gifts and attention, then later reminds you how much they've done for you. When they need something in return, a friend who has always been generous suddenly makes you feel guilty for not being as available as they want. The balance shifts, and what once felt like kindness becomes something you can't refuse. This tactic extends beyond personal interactions. Businesses give free samples because they know people are more likely to buy after receiving something at no cost. Charities send small gifts in the mail before asking for donations, making it harder to ignore the request. Scammers pretend to help before making their ask, ensuring you feel obligated to return the favor, and the weight of obligation isn't easy to shake. It lingers, making people stay in bad situations, agree to things they wouldn't normally accept, and hesitate when they should walk away. Recognizing this trick is the first step to avoiding it. Not every favor needs to be repaid. Not every act of kindness comes with strings. If saying no makes you feel guilty, ask yourself, was this really a gift, or was it a transaction disguised as one? Emotional contagion, exploitation. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt the energy shift? Maybe a single glance at someone's expression made you tense up, or a friend's excitement instantly lifted your mood. This isn't just intuition, it's a psychological phenomenon known as emotional contagion. And in the wrong hands, it's one of the most dangerous manipulation tactics ever used. Emotional contagion is the subconscious transfer of emotions from one person to another. Humans are wired to mirror emotions. It's part of how we connect, empathize, and communicate. If someone around you is anxious, your brain picks up on their cues, body language, tone, facial expressions. And before you know it, you start feeling anxious too. This happens automatically without conscious awareness, and that's exactly what makes it so easy to exploit. A terrifying example of this in action: mass hysteria. Take the Salem, which trials. One person shows fear, another reacts, and soon an entire town is swept up in paranoia. Nobody questions the source. They just react to the emotional waves spreading around them. The same effect plays out in financial crashes, riots, and even cold dynamics. When people around you panic, you feel the urgency too, even if there's no logical reason for it. Manipulators use emotional contagion to control people without ever needing to say do this. Instead, they create an emotional atmosphere that makes people want to comply. A leader radiating confidence can make their followers ignore obvious flaws. A narcissist feigning sadness can guilt trip someone into staying in a toxic relationship. A salesperson hyping up a product can make you feel like you need to buy it simply because their enthusiasm is infectious. Studies show that even faked emotions can trigger genuine responses. A manipulator can manufacture anger, fear, or excitement, and the people around them will absorb and reflect those feelings without realizing they're being played. And once you're emotionally hooked, your ability to think critically starts to fade. It's why political figures rally crowds into a frenzy, why cult leaders maintain unwavering authority, and why toxic relationships often feel impossible to leave. When someone controls the emotional climate, they control the people within it. The next time you feel an emotion rising that wasn't there before, stop and ask, is this mine, or was it planted there? Because not every feeling you experience is truly your own. Micromanipulation. Imagine this: you're in a conversation, everything feels normal, but after a few minutes your thoughts shift. You start questioning your choices, feeling guilty for things you never second-guessed before. The person across from you never raised their voice, never made a direct demand, and yet somehow they've nudged your mind in a completely different direction without you even realizing it. This is micromanipulation, the subtle, almost imperceptible tactics that control people's decisions, beliefs, and behaviors without them noticing. Unlike obvious coercion or deception, micromanipulation works like slow poison, drip by drip, small adjustments that push you exactly where they want you. Take the foot in the door tactic, a classic in sales and persuasion. A company might first ask you to sign a harmless petition, something that aligns with your values. Then days later, they come back asking for a donation because you've already said yes. Once your brain leans toward consistency, you don't realize it, but that tiny first agreement was a setup, conditioning you to comply with a bigger request later. But micromanipulation isn't just about persuasion, it's about control and toxic relationships. Manipulators use this trick masterfully. Imagine a partner who never outright demands obedience, but instead raises an eyebrow, sigh at the right moment, or give a subtle pause before responding. Over time, these tiny cues make you adjust your behavior to avoid their disapproval, even if they never explicitly asked you to change. Workplace environments can be just as dangerous. Ever had a boss who casually mentioned how another employee stayed late to finish a project? They never directly told you to work extra hours, but suddenly you feel obligated. This is how micromanipulation works, planting ideas without stating them outright. And then there's social conditioning. Micromanipulation is used on a massive scale in politics, advertising, and media. Consider how brands create artificial exclusivity, only 5 left in stock, or this deal won't last. They're subtly influencing urgency, making you act without thinking. It's not manipulation in the way you expect. It's worse, because you still think you're making the choice yourself. One of the darkest applications of micromanipulation is in gaslighting. A manipulator doesn't need to outright call you crazy. They just need to question your memory, reframe the narrative, and downplay events subtly enough to make you doubt yourself. They might say, I don't think I ever said that. Are you sure you're remembering correctly? It sounds innocent enough, but over time it erodes confidence, making the victim more pliable, more dependent. This is why micromanipulation is so terrifying. It doesn't look like manipulation at all. It feels like your own thoughts, your own decisions, your own reasoning. It works through gestures, phrasing, timing, and tone, all carefully calibrated to steer you in a specific direction. And the worst part, once someone masters micromanipulation, they can make you believe that their ideas were yours all along. The illusion of choice. You think you're in control. You think every decision you make is entirely your own. But what if I told you that more often than not, your choices are being carefully orchestrated, designed to make you feel like you're in charge, when in reality, you're just following a predetermined path? This is the illusion of choice, one of the most deceptive and manipulative psychological tricks ever used. Think about a restaurant menu. You sit down, glance at the options, and decide between the steak, the pasta, or the salad. But did you ever question why those specific options are there in the first place? Why is there no burger, no sushi? The truth is your decision was already limited before you even had a chance to think about it. This trick is everywhere, from politics to marketing to everyday interactions, and it works because people don't usually question the choices they're given. One of the most famous real-world examples: supermarkets. You walk in planning to grab a loaf of bread, and before you know it, you're walking out with 3 extra things you never planned on buying. How store layouts are deliberately designed to guide your movements, steering you toward impulse purchases while making you believe you're shopping freely. But the illusion of choice doesn't just exist in retail. It shapes our opinions, beliefs, and even our behaviors. Noticed how political debates always boil down to 2 opposing sides. You're told you must pick one or the other, when in reality, the framework of the argument was already set before you got involved. By limiting the choices, the person in control ensures that no matter which option you pick, the outcome still serves their agenda. Marketers use this trick constantly. A company might offer 3 pricing tiers for a product: one cheap, one expensive, and one just right in the middle. Most people choose the middle option, thinking they've made a rational decision, but that middle price point was strategically placed to push you toward. You were never really choosing freely. You were being nudged in a specific direction. This concept is even more sinister when it's used in personal relationships. Ever had someone say, you can either do this my way, or we can end things? That's not a real choice. That's control disguised as compromise. It forces you to accept a limited set of options, making you feel like you had agency, when in reality, you were trapped from the start. The illusion of choice thrives on the assumption that having some options equals true freedom, but real freedom isn't just picking from a list. It's questioning who made the list in the first place. The scariest part: the best manipulators don't need to take away your choices. They just need to make you believe you had control all along, exploiting the need for closure. Some questions never stop echoing in the back of your mind. Why did they leave? What really happened? What was the truth? That goring uncertainty, that feeling of unfinished business. It's not just a minor frustration, it's a powerful psychological force known as the need for closure. And when someone understands just how much you crave a definitive answer, they can use that against you in ways you'd never expect. The need for closure is a fundamental part of human cognition. Our brains hate loose ends. When something is unresolved, our minds work overtime, trying to make sense of it. We fill in the gaps, we create explanations, we latch onto anything that gives us a sense of finality. And this is exactly where manipulation begins. Take relationships, for example. Have you ever heard of someone staying obsessed with an ex, not because they want them back, but because they never got a real explanation for why things ended? That's the power of an open psychological loop. When a breakup happens abruptly, without clear reasoning, it leaves a hole in the person's mind. They replay every interaction, searching for clues, obsessing over possible answers. And if the person who left them hanging ever returns, even with a weak or dishonest excuse, their brain grabs onto it just to satisfy that desperate need for closure. Manipulators know this. They disappear suddenly, only to return later with vague explanations, knowing their victims will be too relieved to question the lies. But this tactic isn't just used in personal relationships. It's weaponized on a much larger scale. Look at cults. One of the most effective ways cult leaders keep their followers under control is by dangling half-revealed secrets. They tell their followers that they are on the verge of learning something life-changing, but they just need to prove themselves first. That Proof it's endless, more loyalty, more obedience, more sacrifice. But the truth is there is no great secret, just a psychological trick to keep people trapped in an endless cycle of searching. Even in politics, the need for closure is one of the most powerful tools of mass persuasion. Political propaganda often thrives on ambiguity. A politician might claim there's something that they're not telling you, or the real story is out there if you look hard enough. They don't provide facts, just enough uncertainty to make people start filling in the blanks themselves, thinking about it, looking for clues, searching for answers until you give in and buy whatever they're selling. But here's where it gets really unsettling. Our need for closure makes us accept any answer, even if it's false. Studies show that when people are desperate for resolution, they become far more susceptible to misinformation, conspiracy theories, and outright lies. It's easier to believe a convenient lie than to live with lingering uncertainty. This is why cult members cling to false teachings, why people fall for scams, and why entire populations can be led to believe completely fabricated narratives. And the worst part, the more we seek closure, the easier we are to manipulate. The more we demand answers, the more control we give to those willing to provide them. Because in the end, whoever controls the answers controls the mind, creating a sense of scarcity. Ever noticed how the moment something seems limited, exclusive, or hard to get, you suddenly want more? Scarcity makes things irresistible, and here's the disturbing part. It's one of the most exploited psychological tricks in existence. Think about Black Friday. Every year, people trample over each other for discounted TVs and microwaves, not because they desperately need them, but because they've been told supplies are running out. Stores manufacture scarcity, creating the illusion of high demand. It doesn't matter if the same product is available next week. In that moment, people act impulsively, driven by fear of missing out. This hijacked your brain at the deepest level. When something is scarce, your survival instincts kick in. Thousands of years ago, scarcity meant life or death. If food, water, or shelter was limited, you fought for it. That instinct still lingers today, making you irrationally chase anything that seems rare, even if you don't need it. It's why luxury brands limit production. The fewer handbags, the more people crave them. It's why social media influencers post exclusive content behind paywalls. The illusion of scarcity makes it seem more valuable, and it's why dating apps make people obsessed over someone who isn't available. The less you can have them, the more you want them. But this psychological trick isn't just about selling products. It's been used to manipulate entire societies. Totalitarian regimes restrict information, making people desperate for what they can't access. Cult leaders use it to control followers, convincing them that only they have the truth and the outside world offers nothing. And the most unsettling part, scarcity makes people blind to logic. When you believe something is slipping away, you stop asking if you even want it in the first place. Bandwagon effect manipulation. It starts with a simple thought: everyone else is doing it, so it must be right. That's the bandwagon effect action, the psychological trick that exploits your deepest, most primitive fear, the fear of being left out. It's what makes people follow trends, believe in misinformation, and conform to ideas they've never even questioned. Think about the Salem witch trials in the late 1600s. A few accusations of witchcraft spiraled into mass hysteria, leading to dozens of executions. Why? Because people saw their neighbors turning on each other, and instead of questioning the madness, they joined in. When the crowd moves in one direction, standing against it feels impossible. At its core, the bandwagon effect is simple. When enough people adopt a belief or behavior, others follow, not because they logically agree, but because they fear being left behind. It's why financial bubbles form. Think of the 2008 housing crisis. People kept investing in real estate, watching prices climb higher and higher. Everyone else was doing it, so it must have been safe, right? Until the bubble popped and the economy collapsed. It's why propaganda works. When a government wants to push an idea, they don't need to convince everyone. They just need enough people to believe it. Once the illusion of consensus is created, the rest follow. And here's where it gets dark. The bandwagon effect is actively weaponized. Advertisers use it to manipulate consumer behavior, making people feel that if they don't buy a product, they're missing out. Social media algorithms exploit it, amplifying content that already has engagement. Because if thousands of people like a post, others are more likely to believe it. even if it's false politicians manufacture public approval by staging rallies with paid crowds, creating the illusion of widespread support. It bypasses critical thinking. People stop questioning whether something is right, logical, or even true. They just go along with it. The more people follow, the stronger the effect becomes, snowballing into mass conformity. And once you're on the bandwagon, you don't even realize it. You become convinced it was your choice all along. Lowballing. You walk into a car dealership excited to buy your first car. The salesperson greets you with a warm smile and says, "Good news, we have a special deal today. This car fully loaded for just $20,000. That's within your budget." You shake hands, feel the thrill of the purchase, and start picturing yourself behind the wheel. But just as you're about to sign the paperwork, the salesperson frowns and says, "I just checked with my manager. Unfortunately, I made a mistake. That price doesn't include some mandatory fees. It's actually $23,000 at this point. You're already mentally committed to the car. You've imagined owning it, maybe even bragged to friends about the deal you got. So instead of walking away, you agree to the new price. You just got low-bolded. This psychological trick is devastatingly effective. It works by getting you to commit to something before the full cost is revealed. Once you've made a decision, even based on misleading information, you become emotionally and mentally invested. Backing out now feels like a loss, even though the terms have changed. One of the most famous studies on lowballing involved college student psychologists asked them to participate in a study. Most agreed, but after they committed, they were informed the study required them to show up at 7 a.m. And even though that's an inconvenient time, most stuck with their original decision instead of backing out. This tactic isn't just for sales. It's used in jobs negotiations and even relationships. A recruiter might promise a dream job with a high salary only for the offer to suddenly include longer hours, lower pay, or extra responsibilities. In more manipulative scenarios, lowballing is used to control people. A cult or extremist group might invite someone in with seemingly harmless requests: attend a seminar, listen to a speech, meet some people. But after committing, they're slowly asked for more and more. By the time they realize how deep they're in, they've already accepted so many conditions that turning back feels impossible. Because the real danger of lowballing, it's not just about losing money, it's about losing control. Door in the face technique. Let's say a charity worker approaches you on the street and asks, "Would you be willing to donate $500 to help struggling families?" That's a big ask. You probably hesitate, feel a little awkward, and then say no, but then they follow up with, "Okay, totally understandable. How about just $20? That second request suddenly feels so much smaller, more reasonable. And without realizing it, you reach into your pocket and hand over the cash. You just fell for one of the most powerful compliance techniques in psychology, the door in the face technique. This trick works because of something deeply embedded in human psychology: reciprocal concessions. When someone lowers their demand after an initial rejection, we feel pressured to meet them halfway. It's as if we now owe them something just because they made a compromise. It's been tested in countless studies. In one famous experiment, researchers first asked students to commit to volunteering 2 hours a week for 2 years at a juvenile detention center. Every single person declined, but then they immediately followed up with a much smaller request: "Okay, would you at least be willing to chaperone a group of kids on a one-day trip to the zoo?" 3 times as many students agreed to the second request compared to when it was asked outright. Why? Because after saying no to the extreme request, the smaller one felt like an easy favor in comparison. And this technique is everywhere. Think about negotiations. A salesperson might start with an outrageous price only to generously bring it down to a number they wanted all along, making you feel like you scored a deal. It's also a favorite tactic in law enforcement and interrogation techniques. A detective might push a suspect with an extreme accusation, maybe even falsely implying a life-ruining punishment, only to then offer a much lesser charge if they confess. Faced with the horrifying first option, the second one feels like an escape, but in reality, it's a trap on a darker scale. This is how manipulative people and organizations operate. Cults, high control groups, and even abusive relationships exploit this principle to break people down. First, they demand absolute obedience or extreme sacrifice, something impossible. But when they relent and ask for just a little loyalty, just a small compromise, it suddenly feels manageable. And just like that, you're in, because the real trick isn't about getting what they ask. For it's about making you feel like saying yes was your idea foot in the door technique. Let's start with a simple question. Would you put a tiny sticker on your window to support a cause you believe in? Seems harmless, right? It's just a sticker. But what if a few weeks later the same organization asked you to put up a full C sign in your front yard? Statistically, you're far more likely to say yes simply because you said yes to the first much smaller request, and just like that you've fallen into one of the most insidious psychological traps, the foot in the door technique. This trick is terrifyingly effective because it doesn't feel like manipulation, it feels like your own decision. One of the most famous real-world examples, the 1974 Patty Hearst case. Patty, the eyes to a newspaper empire, was kidnapped by the Symbian Liberation Army, a radical militant group. Initially, she was terrified, but her captors didn't force her to pledge loyalty overnight. They started small, forcing her to record a message condemning her family. Then she participated in minor activities, and before long, she was robbing banks alongside her captors, fully believing in their cause. How does this work? The trick exploits consistency, bias, our deep psychological need to stay consistent with our past behavior. If we agree to a small request, we subconsciously align ourselves with that choice. When a bigger request follows, our brain justifies compliance by thinking, I already said yes once, so this must be the right thing to do. Advertisers use this constantly. Ever wondered why free trials exist? Once you've used a service for a few weeks, you feel committed. The thought of canceling, even if you don't really need it, feels like going back on your own decision. It's also a weapon in high-pressure sales. First, they convince you to just take a test drive, then just sit down and talk numbers. Before you know it, you're signing papers, trapped by the momentum of your own compliance. And in darker cases, this is how cults and extremist groups recruit. They don't ask for absolute loyalty up front. Instead, they start with something small: attend a meeting, sign a petition, donate a small amount. The deeper you go, the harder it becomes to say no, because once you take that first step, you're already walking down the path they chose for you. Think about this: the next time someone asks for a small favor, the request itself might not be the real trap. It's what comes after that you should be worried about, creating a sense of urgency. Imagine this: you're scrolling through an online store when you see the perfect item, but then a bold red timer appears beneath it. Only 2 left in stock. Sale ends in 3 minutes. Your heart rate spikes. You don't have time to think. If you hesitate, you might lose it forever. So you buy it. And just like that, you've been played. This is the power of urgency manipulation, one of the most effective ways to control human behavior. It bypasses rational thinking and forces people to act on impulse. The worst part, you probably won't even realize you've been manipulated. A perfect real-world example: the 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcast, when Orson Welles performed a fictional alien invasion as a news-style broadcast. Thousands of people panicked. Why? Because it felt immediate. They didn't have time to think critically. Reports of alien attacks spread before anyone even questioned if it was real. That's what urgency does. It hides, jacks your brain, and forces immediate action. So how does this psychological trick work? It plays on loss aversion, of bias, where people fear losing something more than they desire gaining it. The idea that an opportunity is slipping away triggers anxiety, which clouds judgment. Marketers use it constantly. Limited time offer, flash sale, only a few left in stock. These phrases aren't just information, they're psychological weapons. Suddenly, buying isn't a choice, it's a race. And the moment you feel rushed, you've already lost. But it gets even darker. Cults, scammers, and con artists rely on urgency to trap victims before they can think clearly. Pyramid schemes, for example, push recruits into making fast financial commitments. Act now or you'll miss your chance to be rich. The pressure forces decisions without scrutiny. By the time the person realizes, they're already in too deep. Even politicians and media outlets weaponize urgency. Fear-mongering headlines, emergency press conferences, breaking news alerts, all designed to provoke immediate emotional reactions. When people are afraid, they don't stop to verify facts. That's when misinformation spreads the fastest. Think about how wars start, how stock markets crash, how riots explode overnight. It's almost always a manufactured sense of urgency. When emotions take control, rational thought shuts down, and that's the moment people become the easiest to manipulate. The most disturbing part: urgency feels natural. It feels like you're making the right decision when in reality, someone else has already made it for you. So the next time you see a countdown timer, an urgent warning, or someone pushing you to act, immediately pause, because the moment you feel rushed, you might already be under someone else's. Control suggestive language and hypnosis. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone subtly led you to a decision one you thought was entirely your own? Maybe you walked into a store, and before you knew it, you were convinced to buy something you didn't even need. You probably thought it was your own choice. But what if it wasn't? What if a few carefully chosen words could bypass your critical thinking and plant a decision in your mind before you even realize it? That's the power of suggestive language and hypnosis, a method so subtle yet so effective that it has been used to influence everything from courtroom testimonies to political speeches. It's not about swinging pocket watches or making people cluck like chickens. It's about shaping perception without resistance. Take the infamous 1970s case of the lost in a mall experiment. A psychologist named Elizabeth Loftus wanted to test how easily people's memories could be manipulated. She told participants a fake childhood story about being lost in a shopping mall, crying, and finally being rescued by a kind stranger. The catch: this never actually happened. Yet many participants remembered the event in vivid detail. Their minds filled in the gaps, creating a false reality just because someone suggested it. That's the terrifying part of suggestive language. It doesn't need to be true to be effective. It just needs to be framed in a way that your brain accepts it as truth. Now, combine this with hypnosis, and you have something even more unsettling. Hypnosis isn't about mind control, it's about lowering psychological defenses. It puts a person in a state of hyperfocus and relaxation where suggestions slip in without triggering resistance. In this state, someone can be guided to believe, feel, or even remember things that never actually happened. It works through embedded commands, phrases hidden within normal conversation. A politician might say, when you step into that voting booth, you'll feel a strong sense of trust in our leadership. The key phrase: feel a strong sense of trust. It's not an argument. It's a suggestion one your brain processes without questioning. Marketing and sales use this constantly. A waiter asking, would you like the steak or the seafood special, is subtly removing your ability to say no. The question assumes you're ordering. It's just a matter of what. And then there's the yes ladder technique. Small agreements prime people for larger one's. A classic car salesman trick. Start with minor commitments. This is a nice car, isn't it? Wouldn't it be great to drive something this reliable? You'd probably love how smooth the handling feels, right? Each small yes makes the next one feel natural. By the time the contract is in front of you, your brain is wired to agree. But here's where it gets even darker. Suggestive language can be used to alter memories, behaviors, and even identities. Cult leaders, con artists, and even interrogators use these techniques to shape narratives. Frame a question the right way, and you can change someone's reality. Police interrogations have led to false confessions using suggestive language. A suspect repeatedly told you don't remember it now, but memory comes back in pieces. May start doubting their own innocence. Their mind tries to reconcile the contradiction. Eventually, it's easier to just believe they did it. And once a suggestion takes hold, it's nearly impossible to undo. That's the true horror of it. A single phrase, a carefully worded statement, a slight shift in tone, it can rewrite someone's perception of reality forever. So, how many of your beliefs are actually yours, and how many were planted there without you ever realizing it? Priming affects. You walk into a store and soft classical music is playing. You feel a little more refined, maybe a bit more willing to splurge later. You're at a restaurant and the menu has elegant cursive fonts. Suddenly, the higher pric dishes seem more appealing. You think you're making decisions freely, but in reality, you've been primed. Priming is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological tricks. It's the process of implanting an idea into your mind without you realizing it, making you more likely to think, feel, or act in a certain way. It doesn't require force, persuasion, or even awareness. It's a whisper to your subconscious, guiding your decisions before you even know you're making them. One of the most famous examples of priming in action, the old age experiment. Researchers had participants unscramble sentences containing words like wrinkled bingo and Florida. Afterward, they timed how long it took them to walk down a hallway. The result, those exposed to age-related words walked significantly slower without realizing why. Their minds had been primed to feel older, and their Bodies responded accordingly. This trick is everywhere. Supermarkets place fresh flowers near the entrance to make you associate the store with freshness and quality. Political ads repeat the same phrases over and over until they become familiar. Therefore, more believable. Job interviewers are influenced by words they saw earlier in the day. If they read about failure, they might judge a candidate more harshly. Priming works because the brain loves patterns. It's constantly looking for connections. Even when none exist, if you hear the word yellow, you'll recognize banana faster than if you heard an unrelated word. If you see a brand logo frequently enough, you start to feel like you trust it, even if you've never bought their product. But here's where it gets darker. Priming isn't just about nudging choices. It can be used to control narratives and perceptions. News headlines carefully choose words to set the tone of a story before you even read the details. A crime report using youth instead of gang makes the event feel different. A company calling layoffs right-sizing makes job losses sound like a strategic move rather than a failure. And it gets worse in legal cases. A single priming word can sway a jury. When witnesses are asked how fast was the car going when it smashed into the other, they estimate higher speeds than if asked how fast was it going when it bumped into the other. One word, smash, was enough to distort their memory. Social media feeds priming effects constantly. Every suggested post, every trending topic, it's all shaping how you think before you even form your own opinion. Even a simple change in font or color can influence emotion. Studies show that people primed with the color red tend to perform worse on tests, likely because red is unconsciously linked to danger and correction. The most dangerous part: once primed, you rarely question it. If you're primed to see someone as untrustworthy, you'll interpret everything they do through that lens. If you're primed to expect a bad experience, you'll find reasons to confirm it. Priming doesn't just influence one moment, it reshapes how you filter reality. So ask yourself how many of your thoughts are truly yours, and more importantly, how many of them were planted before you even realized it's subliminal messaging. You think you're in control of your thoughts, your choices, your beliefs. But what if I told you that right now, as you listen to this, there are messages being planted in your mind, messages you'll never consciously register, but will still influence your decisions? Subliminal messaging isn't science fiction, it's real, it's powerful, and it's been used for decades to manipulate people without them ever realizing it. The most infamous example, the 1957 Coca-Cola experiment. A market researcher named James Vickery claimed he had flashed the words "drink Coca-Cola" and "eat popcorn" on a movie screen for just a fraction of a second too fast for conscious awareness, but just enough for the subconscious to absorb it. He later reported that concession sales skyrocketed. The world panicked. People feared they were being hypnotized into buying things against their will. While Vickery later admitted to falsifying the results, the concept itself wasn't a lie. In fact, advertising agencies, political campaigns, and even intelligence agencies have since experimented with subliminal techniques because they work at its core. Subliminal messaging is about bypassing critical thinking. The conscious mind filters information, but the subconscious mind absorbs everything. When an image, phrase, or idea is subtly repeated, it embeds itself into your mind without resistance. Later, when you're making a decision, you'll feel a strange, unexplained pull toward a certain choice because it has been implanted in your thoughts. One way this is used: hidden imagery and advertisements. Fast food brands have been caught placing visual triggers, suggestive shapes, familiar symbols, even hidden words to make their food look more appealing. Political campaigns use color psychology and background music to create emotions that subtly sway opinions. Even social media algorithms play a role, nudging people towards certain viewpoints by subtly reinforcing what they want you to see. But it gets worse. Subliminal messaging isn't just visual, it's auditory too. Certain sounds embedded at barely perceptible levels in music or commercials can trigger specific emotional responses. Some studies suggest that low-frequency sounds can induce unease, while higher frequencies can create a sense of urgency or excitement. Have you ever walked into a store and suddenly felt compelled to shop longer? That could be carefully designed background music manipulating your brain into staying browsing and buying. And then there's priming. You see something subtle, an image, a phrase, a color, without realizing its impact later. When you encounter a related situation, your brain fills in the gaps and nudges you toward the outcome. It's been preconditioned to expect casinos do this all the time. Bright flashing lights, the constant sound of slot machines winning, no clocks, no windows. It's all engineered to make you lose track of time and keep spinning. Perhaps the darkest part of subliminal messaging is how seamlessly it integrates into everyday life. News outlets use subtle word choices to shape narratives. Social media platforms carefully curate your feed to reinforce your beliefs. Even in relationships, people can use subliminal reinforcement to manipulate their partners, gradually altering their perception of reality. So the question is, how much of your thinking is actually yours? How many choices have you made that were subtly engineered without you even realizing it? The most unsettling part about subliminal messaging isn't that it exists, it's that you may never truly know when it's working on you. Neurolinguistic programming. Ever had a conversation where someone seemed to be guiding your thoughts without you even realizing it, where before you knew it, you were agreeing, nodding along, and feeling strangely compelled to trust their perspective? That wasn't an accident. That was a technique. Neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, a set of psychological tricks so subtle, so effective that entire industries have been built on them. At its core, NLP is about influencing people's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors through language and subconscious cues. It works by detecting patterns in speech, body language, and mental associations, then subtly steering them toward a desired conclusion. Used ethically, it's marketed as a way to improve communication, confidence, and persuasion. Used maliciously, it can be a tool for manipulation, deception, and even control. One of the most well-known examples, the embedded command, a hypnotic technique where a request is disguised within a casual sentence. Instead of directly telling someone, "You should trust me," an NLP practitioner might say, "You might not even realize it yet, but you're starting to trust what I'm saying." The suggestion is planted. The mind processes it without resistance. Another tactic, mirroring. When someone subtly mimics your posture, speech patterns, and energy level, your brain interprets it as familiarity. You instinctively trust them without even knowing why. Cult leaders use it to build deep rapport. High-press salespeople use it to lower your defenses. It's why you sometimes feel connected to someone you've only just met. But the most chilling NLP trick is anchoring, associating an emotion with a specific word, gesture, or stimulus. If a manipulator repeatedly makes you feel safe whenever they use a certain phrase, your brain links that feeling to them later, even when they're being deceptive. That same phrase triggers trust. The real danger of NLP isn't just that it works, it's that you won't even know it's happening. Pacing and leading. You ever meet someone who just gets you, someone who seems to be on your wavelength, saying the right things, making you feel like they understand you better than most? You trust them, maybe even follow their advice because, well, it feels natural. But what if that was engineered? What if they weren't just understanding you, but leading you without you even realizing it? This is called pacing and leading, a psychological technique used in persuasion, manipulation, and even mind control. It works by first matching the person's thoughts, emotions, or behaviors, pacing them before subtly shifting them toward a desired outcome. Done correctly, it makes people agree, comply, or follow without resistance. Ever noticed how cult leaders, con artists, or even politicians start by mirroring the frustrations of their audience? I know how you feel. You're tired, you've been ignored, you've been mistreated. That's pacing, acknowledging and aligning with the target's current reality. And once trust is established, they begin to lead. And that's why you need to listen to me. I have a solution. Follow me. It's used in everyday life too. Salespeople pace by repeating your concerns before guiding you toward a purchase. Interrogators gain compliance by mirroring body language, speech, and emotional state before steering responses. Even in relationships, someone might first agree with your feelings, making you feel safe before shaping your choices. And here's what makes it dangerous: it feels natural. The manipulation isn't forced, it's welcomed. You think you're making decisions, but in reality, your choices have been prescripted, introduced so smoothly that by the time you realize what's happening, you're already 2 steps ahead on a path you never chose. Exploiting mirror neurons. You yawn when someone else yawns, you laugh when a room erupts in laughter. Your brain isn't just observe obeying, it's mirroring. And while this instinct fuels human connection, it can also be turned against you in ways you'd never suspect. At the core of this manipulation are mirror neurons, specialized brain cells that fire not just when you act, But when you see someone else acting, these neurons are why you flinch when someone gets hurt or instinctively smile. When someone smiles at you, they're the foundation of empathy, bonding, and social influence. But like any powerful tool, they can be weaponized. One of the most infamous examples, the rise of Adolf Hitler. Hitler didn't just give speeches, he mirrored the emotions of his audience. He reflected their fears, frustrations, and hopes back at them. His speeches weren't just words, they were emotional feedback loops amplified by the crowd's response. He didn't persuade with logic, he made people feel. And once emotion takes over, critical thinking shuts down. But mirroring doesn't need a massive crowd to work. Salespeople, politicians, cult leaders, and con artists use it constantly. A manipulator will subtly copy your posture, tone, and gestures to make you feel at ease. Your brain registers the similarity and assumes this person is like me, I can trust them. It's why a skilled con artist can make you spill your secrets within minutes of meeting them. They're not just listening, they're reflecting you back to yourself. And this trick goes deeper. Mirroring can manufacture attraction, and loyalty studies show that when someone subtly mimics your body language, you're more likely to like them, trust them, and agree with them, even if you just met. This is how toxic relationships begin. An abuser may start by mirroring their victim's personality, interests, and values, creating an illusion of perfect compatibility. But once that bond is established, the manipulation shifts. The abuser no longer mirrors, but controls, knowing their victim is too emotionally invested to leave. And this trick isn't just used by individuals, it's built into the systems we interact with every day. Social media algorithms act as digital mirror neurons. Ever notice how platforms feed you content that aligns with your existing beliefs? That's not an accident. The algorithm reflects back what you already think and feel, strengthening your biases and filtering out anything that challenges them. Over time, this creates echo chambers, polarization, and an inability to see other perspectives. So how do you protect yourself? First, recognize when you're being mirrored. If someone copies your mannerisms too closely or reflects your emotions too perfectly, pause and question their intentions. Second, disrupt the pattern, change your posture, shift topics, or introduce an unexpected idea. A genuine person will flow naturally with the conversation. A manipulator will struggle. They rely on predictability to maintain control. Mirror neurons make us human. They help us connect, learn, and empathize. But in the wrong hands, they become a tool for manipulation, turning your own instincts against you. And the most terrifying part, when done well, you won't even realize it's happening. To be moth phenomenon. You ever notice that the moment you learn about something, it suddenly starts appearing everywhere? You hear a weird phrase for the first time, and now it's in every conversation. You see a rare car on the street, and now it's parked on every corner. It's not magic. It's not a conspiracy. It's a psychological trick your own brain plays on you, and it can be weaponized against you. This is called the bee moth phenomenon, also known as frequency illusion. Once your brain latches onto a concept, it starts filtering the world differently. The information was always there, but your mind is now tuned. 2. Recognize it, and that makes it feel like reality itself is changing. Here's where it gets dark. This psychological quirk can be exploited to manipulate what you believe, how you think, and even how you behave without you realizing it. Let's say someone wants to control a narrative. They introduce an idea subtly. Maybe you see a tweet, overhear a conversation, or watch a video, casually mentioning it. At first, it means nothing, but then you start noticing it everywhere. It's in news headlines, social media feeds, casual discussions, and suddenly it feels like a universal truth. But it's not. It's just your brain being hacked. Marketers use this to sell products, a brand. Make sure you randomly encounter their name multiple times a day, making it feel more popular than it actually is. Politicians use it to push ideologies. One repeated phrase, one carefully planted idea, and suddenly it feels like the whole world believes it. Cult leaders, they plant a concept in your mind, reinforce it subtly, and soon it's impossible to ignore. The bee moth phenomenon makes it alarmingly easy to distort reality. And the worst part, it doesn't even feel like manipulation. It feels natural. Your brain convinces you that you discovered this pattern on your own, that the world is confirming it for you. That's what makes it so dangerous. So the next time something suddenly seems to be everywhere, pause, ask yourself, is this really happening? Or is someone somewhere making sure I see it? Confirmation bias reinforcement. Imagine two people watching the same news. Story one believes the government is corrupt, the other thinks it's doing a great job. They both walk away from the broadcast feeling more convinced than ever that they're right. How? Because they only paid attention to the parts that supported what they already believe. That's confirmation bias, the brain's built-in filter that makes us see only what we want to see while ignoring everything else. And here's the dark part. Once someone understands how this works, they can use it to trap you inside your own beliefs. One of the most infamous examples, cults. They don't try to convince new recruits that everything they say is true. Instead, they just subtly reinforce ideas that recruits already suspect. If someone is disillusioned with society, the cult doesn't argue with them. It amplifies that frustration, feeding them only the information that makes them angrier at the outside world. Eventually, they stop questioning and only accept ideas that confirm what the cult wants them to believe. The same principle is used in politics. Ever wonder why people get sucked into echo chambers? It's because reinforcing confirmation bias is more powerful than changing someone's mind. Social media algorithms are built on this. If you click on an article that aligns with your opinion, your feed floods with more of the same, reinforcing your views over and over time. It creates the illusion that everyone agrees with you, because anything that contradicts your beliefs is filtered out before you even see it. And it doesn't stop at politics or cults, it's everywhere. Think about conspiracy theories. Once someone believes the earth is flat, any evidence proving them wrong is dismissed as a cover-up. The more you try to argue, the deeper they dig into their belief, because their brain is actively rejecting anything that challenges it. Marketers and scammers know how to exploit this too. They don't sell you a product by convincing you it works. Instead, they find people who already suspect it works and give them proof that confirms their suspicions. Testimonials, selective data, and emotionally charged language make sure you focus on only the positive results, ignoring anything that contradicts them. Even in everyday relationships, this trick is used to manipulate people. A toxic partner doesn't try to convince you that they're perfect. Instead, they feed into your existing fears, whether it's self-doubt, abandonment issues, or insecurity. They make sure that any situation can be twisted to confirm what you already fear. See, everyone leaves you in the end. Over time, this erodes your ability to see reality clearly, because your brain starts filtering out anything that contradicts those fears. Confirmation bias doesn't just make us ignore the truth, it makes us actively fight against it. Once you're caught in its grip, even undeniable facts feel like an attack. People don't just hold on to false beliefs, they defend them, because admitting they're wrong feels like a personal threat. That's why the most effective manipulators don't try to argue with you. They don't present new evidence or force you to believe something different. They simply control the flow of information, making sure that everything you see and hear confirms what they want you to believe. And once that happens, they don't need to change your mind. You'll do that yourself. Framing affects manipulation. Let's say you walk into a store and see a sign that says 90% fat-free yogurt. Sounds pretty healthy, right? But right next to it, brand says it contains 10% fat. Suddenly, that second one doesn't seem so great, even though it's literally the same thing. This is the framing effect, psychological trick that doesn't change the facts, just how they're presented. And believe it or not, this simple shift in wording is enough to alter your entire decision-making process. Now you might be thinking, okay, so what? That's just marketing. But framing is far more dangerous than making you pick a certain yogurt. It's used to shape political opinions, control public perception, and even manipulate your emotions without you realizing it. Here's a classic example. Imagine a new policy is proposed to combat a deadly disease. If people are told this policy will save 200 lives, they're much more likely to support it than if they're told this policy will let 400 people die. Even though both statements are mathematically identical, one just highlights saving lives while the other highlights losing them. But framing doesn't just work with numbers, it works with morality. Let's take a controversial issue, called one group pro-life and the other pro-choice. Notice how both sides are framed in a way that makes them sound positive. No one wants to be called anti-life or anti-choice. The way something is framed can instantly make it feel right or wrong even before you hit the details. And that's where it gets really dangerous. Framing can be used to control narratives in ways that shape reality itself. Imagine two headlines about the same event: protesters demand justice in the streets, rioting mobs wreak havoc in the city. Same situation, completely different emotional reaction. If you read one, you'll sympathize with the cause. If you read the other, you'll fear the chaos, and yet both could be describing the exact same group of people. This is how media, governments, and even corporations push agendas without ever needing to lie. They don't have to change the truth. They just have to present it in a way that makes you feel a certain way. Once they control the frame, they control your reaction. And it gets even darker in personal relationships. Ever had someone apologize by saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way," instead of "I'm sorry for what I did"? That's framing. It subtly shifts the blame onto you for reacting rather than them for doing something wrong. Or imagine a toxic partner saying, "I'm just trying to help," instead of "I'm trying to control you." The same action, but one frame makes them the savior, the other makes them the villain. Once a frame is set, it's almost impossible to break out of. If you're introduced to a person as trouble, every action they take will be seen through that lens. If a company convinces you their product is a luxury item, you'll justify paying more even if the quality is the same as a cheaper alternative. Framing doesn't manipulate facts, it manipulates perspective. And when someone controls the way you see the world, they don't need to force you to act a certain way. You'll do it willingly. Anchoring bias, exploitation. How much would you pay for a cup of coffee? $10, 5, 1, whatever number popped in your head first. Chances are it wasn't completely random. It was anchored to something, maybe the price of coffee at your favorite cafe, maybe a ridiculous $10 figure I just mentioned. But what if I told you that your perception of value, fairness, and even reality itself can be hijacked by a simple trick known as anchoring bias? And the worst part, you'd never even notice it happening. Let's look at a classic example. Imagine you walk into a store and you see a high-end watch marked at $10,000. That's absurdly expensive, right? But right next to it, there's another watch for $2,000. Suddenly, it doesn't seem so bad. Why? Because your brain just got anchored to the first higher price, even if you weren't planning to buy anything. The comparison makes the second option feel reasonable when in reality, it's still overpriced. This trick isn't just used in sales, it's everywhere. Ever noticed how restaurants have one or two ridiculously expensive dishes on the menu? Those aren't meant to be bestsellers. They exist solely to make everything else seem affordable. Marketers, salespeople, even politicians all use anchoring to subtly control how you perceive information. But it gets even darker. Anchoring isn't just about money. It can manipulate beliefs, emotions, and decision. Imagine you're negotiating for a job salary. The company starts by suggesting a figure that's far below what you expected. You push back, and they generously raise the offer a little. Now, instead of negotiating based on what you deserve, you're negotiating based on the lowball number they planted in your head. And here's where it gets really disturbing. Anchoring is often used to distort reality itself. Let's say a news report tells you that crime in your city has increased by 300%, but they don't tell you what the baseline was. Maybe there was only one case last year, and now there are 4. But by anchoring you to that big percentage, they make the change seem terrifying. Your perception of safety, of urgency, even of what needs to be done, all of it shifts just because of a single carefully placed number. Now, think about personal relationships. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone subtly set a standard, maybe about what's normal in a relationship, how much effort someone should put in, or what's considered too sensitive to be upset about? That's anchoring. To a manipulator might start with an extreme statement like, "You're overreacting. This is completely fine." Even if you push back, your mind starts adjusting to that as the baseline. Over time, what once felt unacceptable becomes the new normal. The terrifying truth: anchoring bias works because our brains crave reference points. We don't judge things in isolation. We compare them to the first number, idea, or emotion we encounter. And once that anchor is set, breaking free from it is almost impossible. The best manipulators don't need to control all your choices, just the first one, because once that anchor is in place, the rest of your decisions will fall exactly where they want them to. Reframing failure is one of the most subtle yet devastating psychological tricks. It's a way to manipulate how you perceive your own mistakes, making you feel powerless, incompetent, or even guilty when failure is Framed the right way, it stops being a simple setback and becomes something far worse, proof that you are not enough. And once that idea takes root, it can control every decision you make. Imagine growing up in an environment where every mistake you make isn't just a mistake, it's a sign that you're fundamentally flawed. You didn't just fail a test, you disappointed your parents. You didn't just mess up a project, you embarrassed yourself in front of your boss. Reframing failure is all about shifting the meaning of your mistakes so that they aren't just temporary obstacles, but reflections of who you are as a person. And the more you believe that, the more control someone else has over you. Take the North Korean regime in that society. Failure isn't just about personal shortcomings, it's framed as betrayal. If you fail to meet work quotes, you're not just an unproductive worker, you're failing the state, your family, and your leader. You're an enemy of progress. That kind of reframing forces people into submission, because now their failures don't just belong to them, they have consequences for everyone around them. But this kind of manipulation isn't limited to extreme regimes. It happens in workplaces, relationships, and even everyday conversations. Have you ever worked for a boss who made you feel like every small mistake meant you weren't cut out for the job? That's not just criticism, it's reframing. Instead of failure being a step toward learning, it becomes a sign that you're inadequate. The more this is reinforced, the more people become afraid to take risks, speak up, or even leave toxic work environments. They aren't just scared of failing, they're scared that failure means they aren't good enough to succeed in the first place. It happens in relationships, too. A manipulative partner can reframe failure in a way that makes you feel dependent on them. They might say things like, "See, you always do this," or maybe you're just not capable of being in a relationship. Suddenly, you don't just feel like you made a mistake, you start to believe that you are the mistake. Over time, this erodes confidence, making you feel like you're lucky to even be tolerated, let alone loved. And once that idea settles and it's easy for someone to control you, one of the darkest aspects of this trick is how it makes people internalize the belief that they deserve their situation. If you can convince someone that failure is a reflection of their worth, they won't even try to change their circumstances. They'll stay in bad jobs, in abusive relationships, in toxic friendships, not because they want to, but because they've been made to believe that any attempt to leave will only end in more failure. And since failure is tied to their identity, they avoid it at all costs. The scariest part is that people don't even realize it's happening. They blame themselves instead of questioning the person or system that is feeding them this belief. They work harder, stay quieter, shrink themselves down just to avoid that crushing sense of failure. But here's the truth: failure is not personal, it is not permanent, and most importantly, it is not defined by someone else. If someone else controls what failure means to you, they might just control you too. Cognitive dissonance: people will defend something even when it's wrong, even when it hurts them, even when reality is screaming at them to stop. But this isn't just stubbornness, it's a psychological trap, a mental battlefield, where without even realizing it, you're forced to justify your own suffering. This is cognitive dissonance amplification, one of the most dangerous manipulation tactics designed to make people double down instead of walk away. Cognitive dissonance happens when someone holds two conflicting beliefs at the same time. It creates an unbearable tension in the mind, a deep, unsettling discomfort that we are hardwired to resolve. Imagine being loyal to a leader, a relationship, or an ideology, only to be confronted with undeniable proof that it's harmful, corrupt, or even false. The logical response: leave. The real response: most people don't. Instead, they dig in deeper, they justify, they twist reality to fit what they want to believe, because admitting the truth would mean admitting they wasted time, energy, even their entire identity on something that wasn't real, and that's too painful to accept. One of the most extreme examples, the Heaven's Gate cult. This group believed they would ascend to an extraterrestrial afterlife if they followed their leader, Marshall Applewhite. When their predictions failed, when the spaceship never came, did they question their beliefs? Number their faith became stronger. Instead of seeing the failure as proof they were wrong, they convinced themselves it was a test of loyalty, and the more they sacrificed, the harder it became to leave. Walking away would mean admitting their entire worldview was a lie. Instead, they doubled down until in 1997 their belief system led to a mass suicide. But this isn't just about cults, it happens everywhere. The trick is escalation. A manipulator starts small, convincing you to accept a minor contradiction, a little hypocrisy, something that feels wrong. but not wrong enough to walk away. A toxic boss pushes an employee to cover for unethical behavior just once it feels uncomfortable, but they justify it. I need this job. Then the requests get bigger before they realize that they're trapped in a system they would have once condemned. The same happens in abusive relationships. A partner starts with subtle manipulation, small moments of confusion, of twisting reality, just enough to create doubt. Over time, the victim has to rationalize the abuse. They didn't mean it. I must have done something to deserve it. Each justification locks them in deeper. Because if they admit the truth, they'd have to face the fact that they stayed. And it's not just individuals who fall for this trick. Entire societies do. Political and ideological groups use it constantly. When people invest in a movement that later reveals itself to be corrupt or hypocritical, they don't necessarily reject it. Instead, they defend it. They find ways to justify the contradictions, because admitting they were fooled feels worse than continuing to believe a lie. So, how do you break free? First, recognize when your mind is fighting reality. Ask yourself, am I defending this because I believe it or because I don't want to admit I was wrong? Second, distance yourself. Emotional attachment clouds judgment. Step back and examine the facts without the weight of your own investment. Cognitive dissonance is a natural part of the human mind, but when amplified by manipulators, it can turn even the most rational person into a prisoner of their own thoughts. The scariest part: the more you fight to convince you're right, the deeper you fall into the trap. The only way out: stop fighting, start questioning the pigma. In effect, imagine a teacher walks into a classroom and secretly believes that half the students are geniuses and the other half are average. No one tells the students anything. No special treatment is given. Yet by the end of the year, the genius students perform dramatically better than the others. Why? Because expectations alone shape their reality. This is the Palian effect, and when used strategically, it can mold people like clay without them even realizing it. The name comes from the Greek myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he created, which then came to life. In psychology, it refers to how beliefs influence behavior. When someone expects greatness from you, you unconsciously rise to meet it. But the reverse is also true. Low expectations create failure before it even begins. A famous real-world example: the Rosenthal and Jacobson experiment in the 1960s. Researchers told teachers that certain students randomly chosen were intellectual bloomers expected to excel. The teachers unknowingly treated these students differently, offering them more encouragement, patience, and subtle signals of belief. By the end of the year, those students actually became smarter, scoring significantly higher on IQ tests. Now think about how dangerous this becomes when manipulated. A controlling boss subtly implies you're incompetent, making you second-guess your abilities until you actually start underperforming. A toxic partner keeps telling you you're lucky to have them, eroding your self-worth so you never consider leaving. Even entire social groups can be influenced. If people are constantly told inferior, they may start to believe it and act accordingly. The Palian effect isn't just about belief, it's about how expectations shape destinies. And the most terrifying part, it happens so gradually, you never realize it's controlling you until it's too late. The zonic effect: you ever notice how an unfinished task lingers in your mind? Like an itch you can't scratch, a song that cuts off before the final chorus, a movie that stops just before the climax. It's unbearable. Your brain refuses to let it go. That's the zonic effect. And it's one of the most sinister psychological tricks ever discovered. Now imagine if someone weaponized that feeling, if they deliberately left things unresolved just to keep you hooked, anxious, and desperate for closure. This isn't just a psychological quirk, it's a tool of manipulation used everywhere from marketing to mind control. The effect is named after Bloomer Zonik, a Soviet psychologist who discovered something strange while observing waiters in a cafe. They could remember every detail of unpaid orders, but immediately forgot them once the bill was settled. In other words, the brain prioritizes unfinished business. Loose ends demand attention. Advertisers exploit this mercilessly. Think about cliffhangers in TV shows. Why does every episode end right when things get interesting? Because the brain hates inmetsness. It fixates on what's left unfinished, making you obsessively crave resolution. That's why people binge watch entire seasons. It's not just entertainment, it's a psychological trap. But the real darkness lies in how the zonic effect is used to control people. Cult leaders, manipulative partners, and even interrogators intentionally withhold closure to keep their victims mentally trapped. A toxic boss who keeps dangling a promotion just out of reach. A narcissist who disappears mid-conversation, leaving you desperate for an answer. A political figure who stirs fear but never provides real solutions. They all rely on the same tactic: leave the brain hanging, and it will chase the answer indefinitely. And the worst part, most people never realize it's happening. Loss aversion. They put two choices in front of you. Option A, you gain 100. Option B, you lose $100. Which one feels stronger? If you like most people, the pain of losing that money hits twice as hard as the joy of gaining it. This is loss aversion, a psychological trick that makes you fear losing far more than you desire winning. And this fear, it controls more of your decisions than you realize. Think about casinos. They know this effect inside out. When you start winning, they flood you with flashing lights and celebratory sounds, conditioning your brain to crave more. But when you lose, they don't make a big deal out of it. No alarms, no dramatic music, just silence. Why? Because they know you're already in psychological pain. And here's the kicker: people who lose money don't just walk away, they chase their losses. They keep gambling, desperate to avoid feeling that loss, permanently loss. Aversion isn't just about gambling. It shapes everything from marketing to relationships. Ever wondered why companies offer limited time deals? Why e-commerce sites tell you only 2 left in stock? It's because your brain panics at the idea of losing an opportunity. You might not even need the product, but the moment you think it's about to slip through your fingers, you suddenly need to have it now. Take this further. In toxic relationships, many manipulators weaponize loss aversion to keep people trapped. They create fear, not of what they give, but of what they could take away. They make you believe that without them, you'd be alone, unloved, or worse. This is why people stay in situations that harm them. It's not because they're happy. It's because the idea of losing what they have, no matter how bad, feels more terrifying than walking away. And if you think you're immune, think again. Every day, politicians, advertisers, and even social media exploit this exact principle. Act now or miss out forever. Your rights are being taken away. Everyone else is ahead of you. The world isn't just feeding you choices, it's making sure you fear the wrong ones. So the question is, how many of your decisions were truly yours, and how many were just a desperate attempt to avoid losing the power of playing dumb? There's a saying, never underestimate the power of a fool. But what if the fool isn't really a fool at all? What if playing dumb is a carefully crafted manipulation tool, a way to control situations, lower people's defenses, and gain the upper hand without them ever realizing it? The power of playing dumb is one of the most underestimated psychological tricks, yet it's been used for centuries by politicians, criminals, and even everyday manipulators. One of the most well-known examples of this trick in action is the legendary Detective Columbo. He was famous for his disheveled appearance, slow speech, and almost clueless demeanor. Every suspect underestimated him, dismissing him as a bumbling officer until he caught them in their own contradictions. That's the essence of this tactic. When you appear less competent or less intelligent, people reveal more than they intend to. They drop their guard, assuming they are in control. But how exactly does this work? First, playing dumb gives the illusion of harmlessness. If someone appears clueless, they don't seem like a threat. People are naturally inclined to take charge when they perceive someone else as struggling, which puts the dumb person in a position to be underestimated. This is especially effective in negotiations, social interactions, and even legal situations. By pretending to be oblivious, the manipulator gathers information without suspicion. They let others explain, fill in details, and unknowingly expose their weaknesses. Then there's the art of selective incompetence, pretending not to know how to do something so that others step in and take responsibility. Employees use this trick all the time to avoid extra work. A person who doesn't know how to set up a presentation, cook a meal, or fix a computer might be fully capable, but by feigning ignorance, they push the responsibility onto someone else. It's a passive form of control, one that forces others to step and do the work and ultimately hand over power. This trick also thrives in social manipulation. Have you ever noticed how some people pretend to misunderstand or misinterpret situation just to avoid accountability? By acting confused or unaware, they dodge blame, when caught in a lie, a manipulator might say, "Oh, I had no idea that's what you meant, or I must have." Misunderstood, this forces the other person to second-guess their own stance-making. Them appear unreasonable for holding the manipulator accountable, but the darkest side of this trick is its ability to exhaust and frustrate its target. Imagine trying to argue with someone who pretends they just don't understand your point. No matter how clearly you explain it, the more you try to clarify, the more they feign confusion. Eventually, you give up, frustrated, exhausted, and sometimes even doubting yourself. This is psychological warfare in its simplest form. It creates a mental loop where the victim becomes increasingly anxious, struggling to make sense of something that isn't actually rooted in confusion, but in deception. In politics, this tactic is often used to deflect responsibility. Leaders may feign ignorance about scandals or mistakes, claiming, "I was never informed," or "I don't recall that happening." It buys them time, shift blame, and creates uncertainty about the truth. When done skillfully, it allows them to escape scrutiny while their opponents waste energy trying to prove what should have been obvious. At its core, the power of playing dumb is about control. It exploits trust, lowers defenses, and manipulates people into revealing too much or taking on burdens they shouldn't. It's a reminder that not every fool is foolish. Sometimes the person pretending to be lost is the one leading you exactly where they want you to go. The halo effect. First impressions are powerful. But what if I told you they don't just shape how we feel about someone, they distort everything we see? That's the halo effect, a psychological trick so subtle, yet so manipulative that it can make someone appear smarter, kinder, or even more trustworthy than they actually are, simply because of one positive trait. And once that halo is in place, it's nearly impossible to break free from its influence. Imagine you're in a courtroom watching two different defendants on trial for the same crime. One is well-dressed, well-spoken, and carries themselves with confidence. The other looks disheveled, nervous, and avoids eye contact without knowing any details of the case. Who seems more guilty to you? Studies show that attractive, confident individuals are more likely to be perceived as innocent, while those who appear nervous or less polished are assumed to be guilty, even if the evidence says otherwise. That's the halo effect in action. This trick works because the human brain is wired to take shortcuts. Instead of evaluating every aspect of a person, we latch onto one striking trait like attractiveness, charm, or intelligence and use it to assume everything else about them. If someone is physically attractive, we subconsciously believe they must also be kind, competent, and trustworthy. If someone speaks with confidence, we assume they must be knowledgeable. And if someone is in a position of power, we naturally believe they deserve to be there. It's why politicians can win elections based on charisma rather than policy. It's why serial manipulators get away with their lies. And it's why leaders who appear strong and authoritative are often blindly followed, even when their actions are questionable. The halo effect isn't just about perception, it actively shapes reality. Think about media coverage. Celebrities who are admired for their talent often get the benefit of the doubt when scandals emerge, while someone already viewed negatively is instantly condemned. It's not logic, it's the halo effect. Distorting judgment. Marketers exploit this trick to perfection. Ever wondered why luxury brands hire attractive, well-dressed models to promote their product? It's not just about selling clothes or watches. They know that if you associate their brand with beauty and status, you'll subconsciously assume the product itself is superior. You're not buying just a car, a perfume, or a suit. You're buying the illusion of prestige that surrounds it. But the darker side of the halo effect is its ability to shield dangerous individuals from scrutiny. Charismatic leaders can hide corruption behind their charm. Manipulative partners can make people ignore red flags simply because they seem caring at first. Even history's worst figures often had an aura of leadership that blinded people to their true nature until it was too late. The halo effect is one of the most insidious psychological tricks because it doesn't just fool people, it makes them confident in their false judgments. And once someone believes in an illusion, they'll defend it. Even when evidence contradicts their perception, they'll eyes it away. He's a good guy. He wouldn't do that. She's so charming. She must be telling the truth. Breaking free from the halo effect means questioning first impressions. It means looking past charm, status, and appearances and asking, what am I not seeing? because sometimes the people who seem the brightest are simply casting the longest shadows. Time constraints. Imagine you're in a high-end watch store admiring an expensive timepiece. The salesperson leans in and whispers, "This is the last one in stock, and I can only hold this price for the next 5 minutes." Your heart races, the pressure builds. You weren't planning to buy anything today, but suddenly waiting feels like losing. This is time constraint as a pressure tactic. And it's one of the most effective ways to make people act against their better judgment. When faced with a ticking clock, rational thinking is the first thing to collapse. The brain processes scarcity as a threat of fear, of missing out, of losing an opportunity that might never come again. In response, the body releases cortisol, spiking stress levels, and making quick decisions feel like the only option. Marketers, con artists, and even cult leaders know this well. By artificially limiting time, they create a sense of urgency so intense that people feel forced to act before thinking. This trick works because of something called decision fatigue. When a person feels rushed, they don't have the luxury of weighing pros and cons. Instead, they rely on instinct. They default to the easiest, safest feeling choice, which is usually what the manipulator wanted all along. That's why limited time offers work so well in sales. It's why car dealerships claim a deal will expire by the end of the day, even though the same exclusive offer is still there the next week. But this tactic goes beyond sales. It's been used to control people on a massive scale. In high-press negotiations, leaders will impose last-minute deadlines, forcing their opponents to make rushed agreements. Cults and extremist groups use time constraints to trap recruits. Decide today, or this opportunity disappears for forever. Even military interrogators have exploited time pressure, bombarding detainees with rapid questions, forcing them to respond before they can think critically. One of the most disturbing applications of this tactic is in scam culture. Ever heard of a high-stakes email scam? You receive a message claiming to be from a bank or government agency warning you that your account is compromised. You have 10 minutes to respond or your funds will be frozen. Rationally, you'd verify why the claim, but the clock is ticking. The fear takes over, and before you know it, you've handed over sensitive information. But here's the darkest part. The illusion of urgency creates compliance. People who normally resist manipulation become highly suggestible under pressure. Studies have shown that when individuals believe they're on a time limit, they're far more likely to obey instructions, even if those instructions go against their morals, instincts, or common sense. So, how do you resist this trap? The key is pausing the moment you feel rushed. Step back, recognize that urgency is often manufactured. Ask yourself, is this really my last chance? Or is someone just making me feel like it is? Because the truth is, when someone pressures you to decide right now, it's usually because they don't want you to think at all. The power of touch, the warmth of a handshake, a reassuring pat on the back, a brush of fingertips on your arm. These small, almost imperceptible touches might seem harmless, even insignificant. But what if I told you that they hold the power to control your thoughts, influence your decisions, and change the way you see the world? This is the power of touch, a psychological weapon so subtle that most people never even notice when it's being used against them, and yet it can shape behavior in ways that are almost impossible to resist. Let's start with an unsettling study. In a classic experiment, waiters in restaurants were told to lightly touch customers on the shoulder or forearm while returning their change. The result, tips increased by as much as 40%. Another study had job interviewers give a brief, seemingly insignificant handshake to candidates. Those who received a firm, confident touch were consistently rated as more competent and hireable, regardless of their actual performance. The explanation lies deep in human psychology. Touch is the oldest, most primal form of communication before language, before speech. Touch was how humans bonded, how we reassured, how we signaled dominance or submission, and that instinct hasn't disappeared. It's just been repurposed. So how does this trick work? It's all about subconscious trust and compliance. When someone touches you, especially lightly and briefly, it creates an instant sense of connection. You might not consciously notice it, but your brain does. It registers warmth, familiarity, even authority. In fact, research shows that when a doctor lightly touches a patient's arm while giving a diagnosis, the patient is more likely to believe them and follow their advice. It's the same reason politicians shake hands obsessively and salespeople make subtle reassuring during contact. Now here's where it gets dark. This effect works even when you don't want it. Studies have shown that even unwanted touch, when not overtly aggressive, can lower a person's ability to resist. Persuasion. Criminals, con artists, and manipulators use this to their advantage. A cult leader might place a hand on your shoulder while speaking, making you feel indebted to them. A skilled interrogator might use a light touch on the arm to make you more likely to reveal information. Even scammers use touch, often brushing against their targets while talking subtly, making them more cooperative. This technique is also used in power dynamics. Ever noticed how powerful people in business or politics will place a hand on someone's back as they walk through a door? That's not just a friendly gesture, it's a display of dominance. They're quite literally guiding the other person, showing knowing who's in control, and more often than not, the person being touched subconsciously accepts that control. And yet here's the most disturbing part: it works even when you know about it. Even now, after hearing all of this, your brain is still wired to respond to touch the way it always has. The next time someone touches your arm, your mind will still associate it with warmth, trust, or authority. You might question it later, but in the moment your defenses are already lowered. So the next time you feel a hand on your shoulder, a fleeting touch on your arm, or an unfamiliar warmth in a handshake, ask yourself, was that an accident, or was it a calculated move to make you just a little more obedient? The decoy effect. The next time you buy something, stop and ask yourself, did you actually choose this, or were you led to it? Because what if I told you that many of your decisions weren't really yours at all, but carefully engineered by an invisible trick known as the decoy effect? This psychological trick is so subtle, so effective that corporations, advertisers, and even political strategists use it to guide your choices without you ever realizing it. It works by presenting you with three options, but one of them isn't really there to be picked. It's just bait to push you toward a specific decision, and once you see it in action, you'll start questioning every choice you've ever made. Let's take a simple example. You walk into a movie theater and you're given two choices: a small popcorn for $3 or a large for $7. Most people might hesitate. $7 seems like a steep jump from $3, but now the theater adds a third option, a medium popcorn for $650. Suddenly $7 for a large doesn't seem so bad anymore. That 50cent difference makes the large feel like the obvious best deal. You were never meant to pick the medium. It was only there to steer you toward the large. This trick isn't just used in concession stands. You'll find it everywhere in subscription services, where the best value plan sits comfortably next to an overpriced, intentionally unattractive alternative. In restaurants, where menu pricing is designed to make a certain dish look like the best deal. Even in elections, where a strategically placed third-party candidate can pull just enough votes from one side to shift the results. But here's where it gets disturbing: the decoy effect doesn't just shape our purchases, it influences our perceptions of value, quality, and even morality. Have you ever seen a public figure get away with something terrible just because someone else did something worse? That's the decoy effect. By introducing a more extreme alternative, the original choice suddenly feels more acceptable, even if it was never truly a good option. And the worst part, the more decision you make under the influence of this trick, the more your brain starts to justify them. You convince yourself that you chose the best deal, that your vote was independent, that your moral compass was unshaken, but in reality you were nudged, manipulated, and guided toward an outcome that was never really your choice to begin with. So the next time you're faced with three options, look closer, because one of them might not actually be a choice at all. The foot and mouth effect. Most people think that being polite and friendly will always work in their favor, but what if I told you that simply making small talk, expressing warmth, or even asking someone how they're doing could make you more vulnerable to manipulation? This is where the foot and mouth effect comes into play, a psychological trick that exploits our own need to be perceived as kind, agreeable, and emotionally invested. And once someone knows how to use it against you, they can shape your decisions without you even realizing it. One of the most well-documented examples of this effect comes from a study conducted by social psychologists Howard and Gangler. They found that when people were first asked a simple, seemingly harmless question like, "How are you feeling today?" they were significantly more likely to comply with a later request, even if that request had nothing to do with the conversation. This is because once someone verbalizes something about themselves, especially something positive, they subconsciously feel the need to maintain that image through their actions. If you tell someone you're having a good day, it becomes harder to refuse a favor right after, because denying them would contradict the positivity you just expressed. This trick is widely used in sales negotiations and even interrogations. A skilled salesperson won't just jump into their pitch. Instead, they'll start with light conversation, asking about your day or making small personal observations. The moment you respond with something like, "I'm doing well, thanks for asking," you've unknowingly put yourself in a psychological trap. You now feel the need to remain consistent with the friendly, cooperative persona you just projected. So when they ask if you'd like to just take a quick look at a product or consider an option, you're far more likely to comply, even if you originally had no intention of doing so. In high-stakes environments like police interrogations or intelligence gathering, this trick becomes even more sinister. Interrogators might begin with harmless, casual questions designed to get the suspect talking in a relaxed and cooperative manner. Once the person starts responding positively, they unconsciously want to maintain that cooperative stance, making it easier for interrogators to extract information or subtly lead them toward a confession. Is a psychological doorway. Once you step through, it's hard to turn back without feeling like you're contradicting yourself. But why does this happen? The foot in mouth effect works because humans are deeply wired for consistency. Once we say something out loud, especially in front of others, we feel an internal pressure to align our actions with our words. Social norms reinforce this behavior, making us uncomfortable with seeming dishonest, rude, or contradictory. If you say, "I love helping people," and someone follows up with a request for help, rejecting them feels like you're going against your own nature, even if helping them was never part of your plan. This tactic isn't just used on individuals, it works on large-scale manipulation as well. Political campaigns and propaganda often begin by getting the public to agree with simple, seemingly harmless statements, like "we all want a better future." Once people acknowledge that idea, they're primed to support more specific policies that align with it, even if those policies weren't something they originally agreed with. By getting people to say yes to broad, agreeable ideas first, they can subtly guide them toward more extreme commitments later on. So how do you protect yourself from falling into this trap? The first step is recognizing when it's happening. If a conversation starts with an unusually friendly or probing question before leading into a request, take a mental step back. Remind yourself that just because you express positivity doesn't mean you owe anything in return. Learn to separate polite conversation from compliance, and don't let your own words be used against you. In the end, the foot in mouth effect is a psychological trick that thrives on the simple act of speaking. It turns your own words into a tool of persuasion, trapping you in a cycle of consistency. The moment you say something, you feel compelled to act in a way that aligns with it, even if it's against your best interests. And once someone knows how to use that against you, it's disturbingly easy to push you toward choices you never intended. To make the IKEA effect, there's a reason why people hold on to ugly homemade crafts, why parents cherish their child's clumsy school projects, and why assembling a piece of furniture makes it feel more valuable than something ready-made. It's not the quality, it's the effort. This is the IKEA effect, a psychological trick that makes people overvalue things they've put effort into, even if the final product isn't particularly good. The effect is named after the famous furniture company IKEA, which sells affordable flat-pack furniture that customers have to assemble themselves. The brilliance of this model isn't just about saving costs. It's about creating attachment. Studies show that when people build something with their own hands, they place a significantly higher value on it compared to something pre-assembled. Even if the two are identical, the act of effort tricks the brain into forming an emotional bond with the object, making people less likely to discard it, return it, or acknowledge its flaws. But this trick isn't limited to furniture businesses. Cults and manipulators exploit the IKEA effect in ways that go beyond just making you overvalue a bookshelf. It's used in workplaces when employees are encouraged to contribute ideas that make them feel personally invested in the company's success despite being underpaid or overworked. It's used in relationships where one person is constantly made to work for the approval of the other, deepening their attachment in a toxic dynamic. It's even used in cult indoctrination, where new members are given difficult or humiliating tasks to complete, increasing their emotional investment and making them less likely to question their beliefs. The IKEA effect is dangerous because it creates a psychological trap. The more effort you pour into something, the harder it becomes to walk away, even when logic says you should. This is why gamblers keep betting after losing money, why people stay in failing relationships long after the love is gone, and why employees remain loyal to toxic companies. The mind convinces itself that because so much work was put in, it must be worth it. And here's the real danger: this effect doesn't just apply to objects and relationships. It can shape entire belief systems, political ideologies, conspiracy theories, even dangerous movements. Once someone has invested time, effort, and personal identity into something, it becomes nearly impossible for them to let go. They'd rather twist reality to protect their belief than admit they wasted their effort on something meaningless. So the next time you feel deeply attached to something, ask yourself, do you truly value it, or have you just put in too much work to walk away? The contrast principle. Imagine you walk into a store to buy a new suit. The salesperson greets you with a warm smile and immediately brings out the most expensive option in the store, a designer suit that costs well beyond your budget. You shake your head saying it's too much, but then they show you a second suit, still pricey, but significantly cheaper than the first. Suddenly, this second suit seems like a bargain, and you convince yourself it's a great deal without realizing it. You've just fallen for the contrast principle, a psychological trick that alters how we perceive value, making things seem better or worse, depending on what they're compared to. This principle works because our brains don't evaluate things in isolation. We understand value by comparison. A $100 shirt feels absurdly expensive if you've just been looking at $20 shirts. But if you've just been shown a $500 jacket, that same $100 shirt suddenly feels reasonable. This mental shortcut happens so fast that you don't even realize you're being influenced. It's one of the most effective persuasion tactics in existence. Salespeople, marketers, real estate agents, and even pressure negotiators use it constantly. Ever noticed how luxury car dealerships show you the most expensive models first? That's by design. After seeing a car that costs $100,000, a $60,000 car feels like a steal, even if it's still outrageously expensive. The contrast principle exploits your perception, not the actual value of what you're buying. But here's where it gets truly dark. This trick isn't just used in sales, it's used to manipulate behavior, decisions, and even how we judge people. Imagine a company introducing a terrible policy: longer work hours, fewer benefits. Employees revolt, refusing to accept it. Then management compromises by offering a slightly less awful policy. Suddenly, employees feel relieved and accept the new conditions, even though they're still much worse than before. The trick: the second option was always the intended goal. The first one was just there to make it look better. By comparison, this same technique is used in politics and media. Have you ever noticed how a particularly controversial law or policy is first introduced? In its most extreme form, outrage follows. People demand change. Then a less extreme version is proposed, and people breathe a sigh of relief. They accept it not because it's good, but because it looks better in contrast to the worse option. And then there's the manipulation of human relationships. Let's say someone wants you to accept mistreatment or control. They might start by treating you terribly, being overly critical or distant. Then suddenly they give you a small kindness, a compliment, a gift, a moment of attention. That kindness feels huge in comparison to the prior mistreatment, and suddenly you feel grateful, even loyal. This is textbook emotional manipulation, and it keeps people trapped in toxic relationships or social dynamics they would have rejected outright under normal circumstances. What makes this trick so insidious is that it feels completely natural. Your brain truly believes the second option is better. It doesn't feel like manipulation, and once this principle is in play, escaping it becomes nearly impossible unless you know what's happening. So how do you fight it? The key is absolute awareness. Whenever you're making a decision, ask yourself, am I judging this based on its actual value, or is something else influencing my perception? Because in the end, the real danger of the contrast principle isn't that people use it against you, it's that you might never even realize they did. The endowment effect. The endowment effect is one of the most insidious psychological tricks because it exploits something deeply personal, our attachment to what we believe is ours. Once we own something, even for a short time, we assign it more value than it objectively deserves. This quirk in human behavior can be used to manipulate decisions, emotions, and even financial choices in ways most people never see coming. Imagine this: you walk into a store and a salesperson hands you an expensive feeling pen, telling you to test it out. As you roll it between your fingers, writing a few lines, it starts to feel like yours. Suddenly, when the price is revealed, it seems reasonable, even if you never intended to spend that much on a pen. That's the endowment effect at work. Simply touching or using something tricks your brain into believing you own it, making it harder to let go. But it doesn't stop with physical objects. The endowment effect is weaponized in everything from marketing to high-stakes negotiations, free trials, test drives, and limited time demos. All work because they create ownership before you've spent a dime. Once something feels like yours, giving it up feels like losing a part of yourself. Retailers know this, which is why they let you borrow their products before committing. It's even more dangerous when applied to ideas and beliefs. People become irrationally attached to opinions simply because they've held them for a long time. This is why changing someone's mind, even with undeniable facts, is so difficult. If they feel ownership over a belief, letting go of it feels like a personal loss. The endowment effect also plays a role in relationships. People stay in toxic friendships and unhealthy romances because they feel invested. They've spent years building something, and the thought of walking away feels like losing everything. But the truth is that's just the illusion of value. The same trick that convinces you an old broken phone in your drawer is worth more than it actually is. When this trick is used strategically, it can be devastating. Cults, con artists, and manipulative leaders rely on it to keep followers locked in by making people feel like they own their choices, their place in a group, or even their suffering. They make escape feel impossible. The deeper the investment, the stronger the illusion of value. And here's the most unsettling part: the endowment effect works even when you know about it. It doesn't matter if you're aware of the trick. Your brain still clings to what feels like it belongs to you. The only way to break free is to recognize when you're valuing something more just because it's in your possession. Because sometimes what feels precious is just a well-placed illusion. The placebo effect. They handed you a pill, you swallowed it, and within minutes the pain started fading. Relief washed over you. Your body responded, and just as expected. But what if I told you that pill was nothing more than sugar, no medicine, no active ingredients, and yet your brain believed it works? So it did. This is the placebo effect, one of the most unsettling psychological phenomena ever discovered. It proves that belief alone has the power to change the body. And while it might sound like an interesting quirk of human psychology, its implications are far darker than you think. Let's start with a well-known case. In the 1950s, a man named Mr. Wright was dying of terminal cancer. His doctor, out of desperation, gave him an injection of what was supposed to be a breakthrough drug. The results were miraculous. His tumor shrank, and he made a full recovery. But here's the twist: the drug was completely ineffective. When Mr. Wright later found out, his cancer returned almost instantly, and he died. Shortly after this is the power of belief. When the mind is convinced something is working, the body follows. Studies have shown that people given fake painkillers release real endorphins. Placebo surgeries, where doctors pretend to operate, have led to genuine improvements in patients. Even Parkinson's patients have seen symptoms improve simply because they thought they were receiving medication. And yet here's where it gets deeply unsettling. This effect can be weaponized if belief can heal, then it can also harm. This is called the nocebo effect, the dark twin of the placebo effect. Instead of convincing people they're getting better, you convince them they're getting worse. Tell someone a harmless pill will make them sick, and their body will create real symptoms: nausea, pain, even full-blown diseases. This has been used throughout history. In voodoo culture, shamans have cursed people to death simply by making them believe they were dying. In medical scams, con artists sell completely fake treatments, making people think they're recovering until it's too late. And in modern pharmaceutical trials, patients sometimes experience serious side effects, not because of the drug, but because their minds expect them. Think about what this means. If belief is strong enough to change your biology, then how many times in your life have you been tricked? How often has your pain, your relief, your sickness, even your recovery been dictated by expectation rather than reality? And more importantly, who's been shaping those expectations?